For over 1,000 years, emperors and kings shaped the destinies of Japan and Korea, not only through war and diplomacy, but through ideas, rituals, and a shared belief in the divine order of rule. From the sacred Chrysanthemum throne in Japan to the Confucian dynasties of Goryeo and Joseon in Korea, their monarchies were more than political systems, they were living embodiments of cultural values, moral leadership, and national identity. But what happens when ancient power meets the modern world? And how have these timeless traditions managed to endure, transform, or vanish entirely? Welcome to our channel, Words of Time, where history speaks and the past comes alive. In this video, we will journey through the remarkable stories of Japan's unbroken imperial line and Korea's revered dynasties. We'll uncover the sacred myths, the Confucian principles that shaped governance, and how these monarchies evolved or disappeared amid colonization, modernization, and national awakening. Join us as we explore one of East Asia's most fascinating historical legacies. The historical development of monarchy in East Asia offers a unique insight into the evolution of political authority, cultural identity, and the legitimacy of rulership. Two of the most significant and influential dynastic traditions in this region are the Japanese imperial house, which is recognized as the world's oldest continuing hereditary monarchy, and the dynasties of Korea, particularly the Goryeo and Joseon, which institutionalized Confucian principles into their governance. The purpose of this study is to delve into these two major monarchic traditions, examining their distinct origins, transformations over time, philosophical underpinnings, and interactions with one another, especially in times of conflict and cultural exchange. While both traditions were deeply influenced by the broader Sinic world, including the cultural and ideological legacies of China, they developed along unique trajectories that reflected their respective historical, geographical, and social contexts. The Japanese monarchy, often referred to as the Chrysanthemum throne, traces its origins to the mytho-historical figure of Emperor Jimmu, who is believed to have ascended the throne in the 7th century BCE. The Imperial House of Japan claims an unbroken line of emperors stretching over 2 millennia, with legitimacy grounded in divine descent from the sun goddess Amaterasu. This lineage, both sacred and secular, allowed the emperor to function as both a religious and political figure. Over the centuries, the real political power of the emperor waxed and waned, especially during the rule of powerful shoguns and regents. Yet, the symbolic authority of the monarchy remained a central pillar of Japanese identity, particularly as it was redefined and revitalized during the Meiji Restoration in the late 19th century. The Restoration recast the emperor as a modern constitutional monarch and figurehead of a centralized, industrialized state, which would go on to become an imperial power in its own right. In contrast, Korea's dynastic experience was shaped significantly by the adoption and adaptation of Confucian ideology. The Goryeo dynasty, founded in the 10th century, was characterized by a complex interaction between Buddhism and royal authority, with an aristocratic elite exercising considerable influence. The Goryeo rulers maintained a relatively pluralistic religious policy, and the dynasty is remembered for its cultural achievements, including the creation of the Tripitaka Koreana and advances in ceramics and printing. However, the dynasty faced numerous internal challenges and external pressures, most notably from Mongol invasions, which altered its political landscape and influenced its royal customs. Following the decline of Goryeo, the Joseon dynasty emerged in the late 14th century as a staunch proponent of Neo-Confucianism. Joseon's founding monarch, Yi Seong-ji sought to realign Korea with Confucian principles by restructuring the state bureaucracy, promoting civil examinations, and curbing the influence of Buddhism. The result was a remarkably enduring and stable dynasty that lasted over 5 centuries. Under Joseon rule, Confucianism permeated every aspect of life, from politics and education to family structure and social ethics. The dynasty also witnessed significant cultural achievements, such as the invention of the Hangul script during the reign of King Sejong and the flourishing of scholarly and artistic traditions. The historical relationship between Japan and Korea is marked by both periods of mutual influence and episodes of conflict. Cultural transmission from the Korean peninsula to Japan in the early centuries of the first millennium played a crucial role in the development of Japanese civilization. Korean kingdoms such as Baekje and Silla served as conduits for the spread of Chinese writing, Buddhism, and governance models to Japan. However, These cultural exchanges were later overshadowed by military confrontations, most notably during Toyotomi Hideyoshi's invasions of Korea in the late 16th century. The Imjin War, as it came to be known, was a devastating conflict that shaped perceptions and relations between the two nations for centuries. Later, in the 19th and early 20th centuries, the rise of Japanese imperialism culminated in the colonization of Korea, which effectively ended the Joseon monarchy and imposed a new regime of control and assimilation. Despite these traumatic encounters, the legacies of both the Japanese and Korean monarchic traditions continue to exert influence in the modern era. In Japan, the emperor remains a potent cultural symbol, even though his role is now purely ceremonial under the post-war constitution. The Chrysanthemum throne still occupies a revered place in national rituals and public consciousness, and the imperial family commands considerable respect despite the absence of formal political power. In Korea, the memory of dynastic rule is preserved in historical sites, scholarly traditions, and cultural heritage, even though the nation has adopted a republican form of government. The Confucian values that underpinned Joseon governance continue to shape Korean attitudes towards education, family, and social responsibility. This video will proceed by exploring, in detail, the origins and evolution of the Japanese monarchy, followed by a thorough examination of the Goryeo and Joseon dynasties. It will then analyze the nature and consequences of Japan-Korea interactions across the centuries, especially focusing on cultural exchange, war, and colonization. Finally, it will assess how these dynastic traditions were transformed in the modern era and what legacies they have left for contemporary Japan and Korea. By comparing these two monarchic systems, we gain a richer understanding of how different societies have sought to legitimize political authority, define cultural identity, and navigate the challenges of both internal reform and external engagement. Ultimately, the study of the Chrysanthemum crown and Korea's Confucian dynasties offers more than a historical account. It invites reflection on the enduring power of tradition, the adaptability of institutions, and the contested meanings of sovereignty and nationhood. Through their long histories, Japan and Korea have demonstrated both the resilience of their cultural foundations and the dynamism required to confront the modern world. This narrative, spanning centuries of change and continuity, provides a compelling window into the complexity of East Asian history and the enduring significance of monarchy as a political and cultural institution. The history of Japan's monarchy is one of remarkable continuity, ideological evolution, and institutional transformation. As the world's oldest continuing hereditary monarchy, the Japanese imperial house offers a unique lens through which to understand not only Japan's national identity, but also broader patterns of kingship and governance in world history. Rooted in ancient myth and ritual, sustained through periods of political marginalization, and revitalized in the modern era, the Chrysanthemum throne embodies both tradition and adaptability. This chapter will examine the origins of the Japanese monarchy, the historical evolution of imperial power, the relationship between religion and kingship, and the emergence of the modern emperor as a constitutional and symbolic figure. The mythological origins of the Japanese monarchy are foundational to its enduring prestige and legitimacy. According to the ancient chronicles Kojiki and Nihon Shoki, the Japanese imperial line began with Emperor Jimmu, who is said to have ascended to the throne in the 7th century BCE. He was a direct descendant of the sun goddess Amaterasu, who sent her grandson, Ninigi no Makoto, to rule over the earth. These texts, compiled in the early 8th century CE, sought to provide a divine genealogy for the ruling family and to consolidate the Yamato court's claims to supremacy. The blending of myth and history in these texts illustrates how religious belief and political authority were inseparable in early Japanese thought. From the 4th to the 8th centuries, the Yamato court gradually extended its influence over other clans and regions. By the time of the Nara period, the central government had developed a rudimentary bureaucratic system modeled on Chinese Confucian governance, complete with a capital, legal codes, and a structured aristocracy. However, unlike the Chinese dynastic model, the Japanese imperial line was never interrupted or replaced. This continuity, even during periods of internal strife and shifting power dynamics, became a defining characteristic of the monarchy. It also reinforced the notion that the emperor was not just a political figure, but a living symbol of divine order and national unity. During the Heian period, the imperial court became the center of a refined aristocratic culture, where literature, art, and courtly etiquette flourished. Yet, as court life became increasingly ceremonial, real political power began to shift to powerful noble families, most notably the Fujiwara clan. Through strategic marriages and regencies, the Fujiwara exercised de facto control over the state, often relegating emperors to symbolic roles. This period saw the emergence of the practice of insei, or cloistered rule, where retired emperors continued to wield influence from behind the scenes. Despite their limited political agency, emperors during this era retained religious authority, conducting key state rituals and embodying the nation's sacred traditions. The rise of the warrior class in the late 12th century marked a dramatic shift in Japan's political structure. The establishment of the Kamakura shogunate under Minamoto no Yoritomo created a dual system of governance in which the emperor remained the symbolic head of state, while real power rested with the shogun. This arrangement persisted through successive military governments, including the Ashikaga and Tokugawa shogunates. Throughout these centuries, the emperor continued to perform religious ceremonies, validate political appointments, and serve as a custodian of national identity, even as the imperial court itself fell into poverty and relative obscurity. Despite this marginalization, the idea of the emperor as the spiritual heart of the nation endured. The court maintained its ancient rituals, including those at the Ise Grand Shrine, dedicated to Amaterasu. These ceremonies affirmed the divine origins of the imperial line and connected the emperor to the cosmos and the agricultural cycles upon which the people depended. The shogunate, while dominant politically, continued to derive legitimacy from imperial endorsement, illustrating the enduring symbolic power of the throne. The dramatic reconfiguration of the monarchy came with the Meiji Restoration in 1868. This pivotal moment marked the end of the Tokugawa shogunate and the beginning of a centralized, modern state under imperial leadership. The young Emperor Meiji became the face of Japan's transformation, embodying both continuity with the past and the promise of a new era. The Meiji government rapidly implemented reforms aimed at modernization, industrialization, and national unity, using the emperor as a unifying figure to legitimize its authority. The Meiji Constitution of 1889 formalized the emperor's status as the sovereign head of state, endowed with extensive powers over the military, foreign policy, and lawmaking. Yet in practice, these powers were exercised by the genro, or elder statesmen, and the emerging bureaucracy. The emperor remained a largely ceremonial figure, whose presence sanctified government decisions rather than determined them. Nonetheless, his image was cultivated through education, media, and public rituals to reinforce a sense of national loyalty and cultural pride. As Japan emerged as a major imperial power in the early 20th century, the emperor became increasingly associated with state ideology and militarism. The Taisho and early Showa periods saw a complex interplay between constitutional government and authoritarian tendencies, culminating in the mobilization of emperor-centered nationalism during the Second World War. Emperor Hirohito was presented as a divine figure, the embodiment of the kokutai, or national essence, around whom the population was expected to rally. While Hirohito's exact role in wartime decision-making remains debated, there is no doubt that his position was central to the moral and symbolic justification of Japan's expansionist policies. The defeat of Japan in 1945 and the subsequent Allied occupation led to another profound transformation of the monarchy. Under the guidance of the American-led occupation authorities, Japan adopted a new constitution in 1947 that redefined the emperor's role. Article 1 declared that sovereignty resided with the people, and Article 1 of the new constitution identified the emperor as the symbol of the state and of the unity of the people, devoid of governing power. Emperor Hirohito renounced his divine status in a public broadcast, marking a significant rupture with centuries of imperial ideology. In the post-war era, the monarchy became a purely ceremonial institution, focusing on public engagements, cultural events, and diplomatic visits. Emperors Showa, Heisei, and Reiwa have worked to humanize the institution, engaging directly with citizens, visiting disaster-stricken areas, and promoting peace and reconciliation. The imperial family's role has shifted from sacrosanct isolation to approachable national service, reflecting broader societal changes in democratic Japan. While debates occasionally arise about the relevance and cost of maintaining the monarchy, public support remains strong, and the imperial family continues to be held in high esteem. Throughout its long history, the Japanese monarchy has demonstrated a remarkable ability to adapt to changing political, social, and ideological landscapes. Its endurance can be attributed not only to the sanctity ascribed to its divine origins, but also to its flexibility in redefining its functions in response to shifting circumstances. From mythic beginnings to modern constitutionalism, the Chrysanthemum throne remains a powerful symbol of national identity, continuity, and cultural heritage. The Japanese experience challenges conventional understandings of monarchy by illustrating how a ruling institution can maintain its legitimacy not through force or political dominance, but through ritual, symbolism, and historical memory. The emperor's enduring role in Japanese society is a testament to the deep roots of tradition and the capacity of institutions to evolve while preserving their foundational narratives. As Japan continues to navigate the challenges of the 21st century, the monarchy will likely remain a vital link to the past and a ceremonial anchor for the nation's collective identity. Then comes the Goryeo dynasty, which ruled the Korean peninsula from the early 10th century to the late 14th century, represents one of the most pivotal and culturally rich periods in Korean history. It was during this era that the name Korea itself was derived, evolving from the kingdom's title. Goryeo was characterized by a unique blending of aristocratic governance, powerful Buddhist institutions, and complex relationships with regional powers. Though less centralized than later dynasties, Goryeo maintained a distinct and influential political identity that shaped the foundations for Korean culture, religion, and political organization. The foundation of the Goryeo dynasty in the year 918 by Wang Jian marked the culmination of a series of conflicts and unifications among the remnants of the later three kingdoms. Later Baekje, later Goryeo, also known as Taebong, and Silla. Wang Jian, who later took the temple name King Taejo, was a military leader of noble lineage from Songgak, a strategic city in the northern region. His pragmatic policies and military acumen enabled him to consolidate power and bring stability to a peninsula fragmented by rival factions. King Taejo envisioned a reunified Korea under a central monarch, but his vision included accommodating powerful regional clans and aristocrats to maintain cohesion. This pragmatism led to a system of shared governance with hereditary aristocracy. These noble families were granted significant landholdings, local authority, and roles within the royal court, which resulted in a decentralized political structure. While the monarchy remained the nominal center of power, in practice, the aristocratic class wielded substantial influence. Religion, especially Buddhism, played a vital role in legitimizing Goryeo's authority. The dynasty embraced Buddhism as its state ideology, integrating its principles into governance and public life. The kings and nobility patronized Buddhist temples, built grand monasteries, and sponsored the transcription of scriptures. The support for Buddhism was both spiritual and political. It provided moral authority to the throne and served as a cultural force that united the aristocracy and commoners alike. Among the most notable achievements of the Goryeo dynasty was the production of the Tripitaka Koreana, a complete set of Buddhist scriptures carved onto over 80,000 wooden printing blocks. Created to invoke divine protection during times of national crisis, the Tripitaka represents one of the most comprehensive and meticulously crafted Buddhist canons in existence. Its completion, despite being destroyed and recreated multiple times, exemplifies the deep commitment of the Goryeo state to Buddhist values and cultural preservation. The Goryeo kings themselves often entered into monastic life or received posthumous Buddhist titles. Many rulers constructed their own mortuary temples and sponsored religious ceremonies. Royal patronage extended to various Buddhist sects, though the Seon school of meditation Buddhism gained particular prominence. At the same time, the aristocracy and temple networks became intertwined, with noble families sponsoring specific temples and receiving spiritual legitimacy in return. This interdependence reinforced both the religious and political order. The aristocratic nature of Goryeo society was deeply entrenched in the bone rank system inherited and modified from Silla. Aristocratic families, often based in the capital or major provincial centers, monopolized government positions through a quasi-hereditary civil service examination system. While meritocratic in theory, access to education and examination opportunities was largely restricted to elite families. Consequently, Goryeo's bureaucracy reflected the dominance of entrenched lineages, which often competed with one another for influence at court. This competition, while stabilizing in certain respects, also introduced elements of factionalism and instability. Succession disputes were common, with influential families backing rival claimants to the throne. Kings frequently found themselves beholden to powerful ministers and generals. At times, royal authority was nearly eclipsed by dominant clans or military strongmen. The reigns of some monarchs, including King Huizong and King Myeongjong, were marked by such power struggles, leading to periods of political paralysis and court intrigue. One of the most defining challenges to Goryeo's political autonomy came from external invasions, most significantly the Mongol incursions in the 13th century. The Mongol Empire, under the leadership of Genghis Khan's successors, launched repeated campaigns against Goryeo beginning in the 1220s. The invasions were devastating, leading to widespread destruction, population displacements, and social upheaval. After prolonged resistance, including the temporary relocation of the royal court to Ganghwa Island, Goryeo eventually entered into a tributary relationship with the Mongol Yuan dynasty. This relationship, while formally hierarchical, allowed Goryeo to retain its monarchy and internal governance. However, the court came under considerable Mongol influence. Members of the royal family intermarried with Mongol princesses, and Mongol customs permeated court rituals and administrative practices. While the Goryeo kings retained their titles, their autonomy was curtailed, and key decisions required Yuan approval. Despite this, the period of Mongol domination also introduced new cultural influences, such as Central Asian art forms, clothing styles, and technological innovations. Domestically, the prolonged period of conflict and subordination led to social and economic transformations. Many local gentry families rose to prominence by serving as military commanders or administrators during the chaos. These new elites often clashed with the established aristocracy, creating tensions within the ruling class. Moreover, the financial burden of tribute, military mobilization, and reconstruction placed a heavy strain on peasants and commoners, leading to widespread unrest and banditry in some regions. Yet, despite these hardships, the Goryeo dynasty also experienced periods of cultural and artistic flourishing. Goryeo Celadon ceramics, celebrated for their refined glaze and elegant shapes, represent one of the high points of Korean visual arts. The royal court sponsored painting, literature, and historical compilation projects, including the Goryeo Essay, or History of Goryeo, which chronicled the dynasty's development. These achievements reflect a society that, even amid turmoil, prioritized cultural refinement and intellectual endeavor. One significant feature of Goryeo's political system was its flexibility in maintaining a balance between central authority and regional autonomy. The king was often seen as a first among equals, a figure who mediated among powerful families rather than commanding them outright. This model allowed for a degree of stability, especially during the dynasty's early and middle periods. However, it also made the central government vulnerable to fragmentation and takeover by ambitious warlords or corrupt officials. By the late 14th century, internal corruption, succession disputes, and growing dissatisfaction among reformist factions culminated in a crisis of legitimacy. Military leaders such as General Yi Song-ji, who had risen to prominence through campaigns against northern invaders, began to advocate for systemic reform. The collapse of the Yuan dynasty in China further destabilized the regional order, creating opportunities for ambitious Korean leaders to reshape the political landscape. In 1392, Yi Song-ji launched a coup against the ruling Goryeo monarch and established a new dynasty, later named Joseon. This marked the formal end of the Goryeo era, though many of its cultural and institutional legacies endured. The transition was not simply a change in dynasty, but also a shift in ideological orientation, from a state grounded in Buddhist and aristocratic values to one structured around Confucian rationalism and bureaucratic centralization. Despite its ultimate demise, the Goryeo dynasty occupies a special place in Korean historical memory. It was a period of resilience in the face of foreign invasions, innovation in the realms of religion and culture, and a distinctive aristocratic system that shaped the contours of Korean governance. The coexistence of monarchy, Buddhism, and aristocracy created a complex and dynamic society whose achievements continue to be celebrated. The legacy of Goryeo is evident in modern Korea's appreciation of Buddhist art, the enduring importance of lineage and ancestry, and the continued reverence for historical scholarship. Sites such as the capital city of Gaejeong, now Kaesong in present-day North Korea, and the repositories housing the Tripitaka Koreana at Heinsa Temple serve as reminders of this rich historical period. The dynasty's contributions to Korean identity, spirituality, and statecraft laid the groundwork for many of the institutions and values that would be further developed under the Joseon dynasty. Goryeo's history is ultimately one of balancing continuity with change, tradition with innovation, and autonomy with subordination. Its rulers navigated a complex web of internal and external pressures, relying on the support of both aristocratic allies and religious institutions. The Buddhist worldview that underpinned Goryeo governance offered a vision of moral order and cosmic harmony, even as the political realities often fell short of these ideals. Through its achievements and its struggles, Goryeo left an indelible mark on the Korean historical experience, one that continues to inspire reflection and admiration. Now it's the Joseon dynasty, established in the year 1392 by General Lee Seong-gi, marked a profound transformation in Korean governance, society, and culture. While the preceding Goryeo dynasty had been deeply intertwined with Buddhism and aristocratic rule, Joseon embraced Neo-Confucianism as the ideological cornerstone of statecraft. For over 5 centuries, Joseon maintained relative continuity in its institutions, presiding over one of the longest Confucian states in history. This chapter examines the foundation of Joseon, its ideological transformation, bureaucratic and social systems, foreign relations, cultural achievements, internal crises, and enduring legacies in Korean civilization. Lee Seong-gi, later crowned as King Taejo, came to power during a time of political discontent, external threat, and dynastic exhaustion. The waning Goryeo court had become increasingly corrupt and unable to respond effectively to challenges posed by the collapse of the Mongol Yuan dynasty in China and the rising power of the Ming. A general of humble background but considerable military prowess, seized the moment. He garnered support among reformist Confucian scholars and disaffected aristocrats who sought to replace Goryeo's Buddhist aristocratic order with a more rational and morally grounded political framework. Upon founding Joseon, King Taejo and his advisors sought to legitimize the new dynasty by aligning with the Ming dynasty and presenting Joseon as a morally upright state, ruled in accordance with Confucian principles. This decision was strategic, both to secure international recognition and to distance the new regime from the Buddhist corruption they associated with Goryeo. Thus, while Buddhism was not entirely abolished, it was systematically marginalized. Temples were closed, lands were confiscated, and monks were often relegated to the periphery of society. Neo-Confucianism, with its emphasis on hierarchy, filial piety, ethical governance, and ritual propriety, provided an ideal ideological framework for Joseon's statecraft. Confucianism emphasized the ruler's duty to act as a moral exemplar, ruling by virtue rather than coercion. The mandate of heaven, while a Chinese concept, was adapted to justify Joseon kingship, suggesting that only rulers who governed justly and in accordance with Confucian values retained legitimacy. The Joseon state institutionalized Confucian ideology through a highly structured bureaucracy. The civil service examination system, known as the Goryeo, became the principal means of recruiting officials. These exams tested knowledge of Confucian classics, poetry, and administrative law. Although designed to be meritocratic, access to education remained largely restricted to the Yongben class, the hereditary aristocracy. Nonetheless, the examination system fostered a culture of scholarship and promoted a merit-based ideal that reinforced state ideology. The Yongban were more than just officials; they were cultural and moral leaders, expected to embody Confucian virtues in both public service and private life. Land ownership, literary cultivation, and adherence to Confucian rituals defined their status. The rigidity of Joseon society was reinforced by a class hierarchy that included commoners, artisans, merchants, and slaves. Social mobility, while not impossible, was limited. The rigid status system reflected the Confucian concern with order, harmony, and hierarchy. At the heart of Joseon governance was the Wujongbu, or state council, which advised the king and oversaw central administration. Below it, various ministries managed specific aspects of governance, such as finance, military affairs, and justice. Local administration was handled by magistrates appointed from the central bureaucracy. Joseon kings, while theoretically omnipotent, often found their power checked by Confucian scholars and institutional norms. Court politics was often dominated by factional rivalries between different scholarly groups, such as the Saram and the Hungu. These factions debated not only policy, but also interpretations of Confucian doctrine, court ritual, and historiography. Such debates occasionally led to purges, known as sawa, or literati purges, where losing factions were exiled or executed. While factionalism sometimes weakened governance, it also contributed to vibrant intellectual discourse and the evolution of Confucian thought. Leading scholar officials such as Yi Huang and Ei developed distinctive Korean interpretations of Neo-Confucianism that influenced later generations. Joseon foreign policy was defined by a doctrine of sati, or serving the great, which prioritized harmonious relations with Ming China. This Sinocentric worldview positioned Joseon as a loyal tributary state, proud of its Confucian orthodoxy and cultural refinement. Tribute missions to the Ming court were regular and elaborate, reinforcing diplomatic ties and facilitating cultural exchange. Joseon scholars adopted Chinese script, historical models, and philosophical texts, often seeking to outdo their Chinese counterparts in Confucian orthodoxy. Joseon's interactions with neighboring Japan and the Jurchens were more complex. In the late 16th century, the kingdom faced one of its gravest external threats during the Imjin War. Toyotomi Hideyoshi of Japan launched a massive invasion in 1592, aiming to conquer Korea and ultimately Ming China. The Joseon military, unprepared for such an onslaught, initially suffered catastrophic losses. However, with the aid of Ming reinforcements and brilliant naval tactics led by Admiral Yi Sun-sin, the invasion was repelled. The war left the peninsula devastated, with cities burned, populations displaced, and cultural treasures looted. Despite the destruction, Joseon emerged with its sovereignty intact and national pride reinforced. The figure of Admiral Yi, who famously deployed turtle ships and never lost a battle, became a symbol of patriotic resistance. The trauma of the invasion also prompted military and administrative reforms, though these were uneven and often resisted by conservative elements. The 17th century brought new challenges. The fall of the Ming dynasty and the rise of the Manchu Qing Empire forced Joseon to re-evaluate its diplomatic stance. Reluctant to abandon its loyalty to Ming, Joseon resisted the Qing and suffered two invasions in 1627 and 1636. After its defeat, Joseon became a Qing tributary but continued to idealize the Ming in its historical writings and rituals. This duality of realpolitik and moral resistance shaped Joseon identity for generations. Culturally, Joseon was a golden age for Confucian scholarship, historical writing, and artistic refinement. The court sponsored the compilation of national histories, such as the Annals of the Joseon dynasty, which are now recognized by UNESCO as a documentary heritage of global importance. The dynasty also standardized the Korean script, Hangul, in the 15th century under King Sejong the Great. Although its adoption was slow among elites, Hangul eventually became a vital tool for literacy and national identity. King Sejong's reign represents a pinnacle of Joseon achievement. He oversaw innovations in music, astronomy, agriculture, and printing. His creation of Hangul was motivated by a desire to make literacy accessible to commoners who struggled with classical Chinese. This democratizing impulse contrasted with Confucian elitism and reflects the nuanced legacy of Joseon, which balanced hierarchy with efforts toward benevolent governance. The role of women in Joseon society became increasingly constrained under Confucian influence. While women in early Joseon retained some property rights and visibility in public life, the spread of patrilineal ideology led to the seclusion of women, stricter codes of chastity, and reduced legal autonomy. Female education focused on morality and domesticity, exemplified by texts like Nahun, or Instructions for Women. Despite these restrictions, women played significant roles in family management, informal networks of influence, and artistic production. The economy of Joseon was largely agrarian, based on land taxation and peasant labor. State land surveys and redistribution were periodically attempted, but over time, land ownership became increasingly concentrated among elite families. This led to growing disparities and periodic rural unrest. Efforts at reform, such as the land equalization proposals of Jong Yakyong, were mostly stymied by entrenched interests. However, localized commerce and urban markets grew steadily, especially in the later dynasty. Religious life in Joseon was dominated by Confucian rituals, but popular Buddhism, shamanism, and Taoist practices persisted among the common people. State orthodoxy sought to suppress non-Confucian traditions, yet folk religion remained vibrant. Ancestral rites, geomancy, and seasonal festivals continued to structure daily life. This gap between official ideology and lived religious practice reflected the complex spiritual landscape of Joseon society. The 18th century saw attempts at reform and renewal. Kings Yongzhou and Jeongzhou implemented policies aimed at bureaucratic efficiency, meritocratic recruitment, and social equity. Jeongzhou, in particular, promoted scholarship, founded the Kyujanggak Royal Library, and sought to empower reformist officials. Yet these efforts were constrained by persistent factionalism, economic inequality, and resistance from conservative Yongban. By the 19th century, Joseon faced mounting internal and external pressures. Peasant uprisings, such as the Hongjiane Rebellion, reflected widespread discontent. The spread of Catholicism, despite official persecution, introduced new ideas and networks of resistance. Western powers, along with Japan, began to pressure Joseon for trade and diplomatic access. The dynasty's isolationist policies, known as the Hermit Kingdom approach, delayed but could not prevent foreign intrusion. The twilight of the Joseon dynasty came in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Reformist movements like the Gaba reforms sought to modernize the state, abolish class distinctions, and strengthen sovereignty. However, internal opposition and external manipulation undermined these efforts. The Japanese annexation of Korea in 1910 formally ended the Joseon dynasty and ushered in a painful era of colonial rule. Despite its end, the legacies of Joseon remain deeply embedded in Korean culture. The emphasis on education, family hierarchy, moral governance, and historical consciousness all trace back to Joseon-era ideals. Modern Korea's reverence for scholarship, its civil service traditions, and its cultural aesthetics reflect this inheritance. Confucian rituals and ancestral veneration remain common, even in a largely secular contemporary society. Joseon stands as a remarkable example of a Confucian state that endured for over 500 years. Its successes and failures offer insights into the adaptability and rigidity of ideological governance. While Confucianism provided moral structure and bureaucratic integrity, it also entrenched hierarchies and resisted necessary reforms. Joseon's experience illustrates both the strengths and limits of rule by virtue, as well as the enduring tension between tradition and innovation. In the arc of Korean history, Joseon represents not just a dynasty, but a civilizational ethos. It defined what it meant to be Korean for centuries and laid the intellectual and institutional groundwork for modern nationhood. Its integration of Confucian ideals with Korean realities created a unique and lasting cultural synthesis, one that continues to shape Korea's identity, values, and aspirations in the 21st century. Throughout history, Japan and Korea have shared a complex, multifaceted relationship marked by cultural exchange, diplomatic interaction, and military conflict. As two neighboring civilizations in East Asia, they have influenced and challenged each other in ways that shaped their national identities and historical trajectories. From the early exchanges in ancient times to the brutal conflicts of the modern era, the relationship between Japan and Korea has evolved along parallel paths, alternately characterized by cooperation and confrontation. This chapter explores the key themes that define their shared history, including diplomacy, cultural exchange, conflict, and the enduring legacy of their intertwined past. The earliest recorded contact between Japan and Korea dates back to the first centuries of the Common Era. During this period, Korea was divided into the three kingdoms of Goryeo, Baekje, and Silla. These states interacted with the emerging Yamato state in Japan through diplomatic envoys, trade missions, and the transmission of cultural and technological knowledge. Of particular importance was the relationship between Baekje and Yamato Japan. Baekje, known for its advanced culture and close ties with China, played a crucial role in transmitting Chinese writing, Buddhism, Confucian texts, and artistic styles to Japan. In the 4th and 5th centuries, Baekje sent scholars, artisans, and Buddhist monks to the Yamato court, laying the foundation for Japan's classical civilization. These emissaries introduced the Chinese script, which became the basis for written Japanese, and Confucian moral codes that influenced court rituals and governance. Baekje's gift of Buddhist sutras and statues in the 6th century marked the formal introduction of Buddhism to Japan, a cultural revolution that transformed Japanese religion, art, and architecture. This cultural transmission was not one way. Japan also provided military aid to Beech during its wars with rival kingdoms, illustrating the strategic depth of their alliance. However, regional dynamics shifted dramatically in the late 7th century. The unification of Korea under the Silla dynasty, with Tang China's support, led to the downfall of Beech and Goryeo. Japan, alarmed by Silla's growing power and the threat of a China-Korea axis, launched the ill-fated Battle of Baekgang in 663 in an attempt to aid Beech's restoration. The defeat curtailed Japan's influence on the Korean peninsula and led to a more inward-looking period for the Japanese state. For centuries afterward, relations between the unified Korean kingdom and Japan remained limited, punctuated by sporadic contacts and cautious diplomacy. The establishment of the Goryeo dynasty in Korea and the Kamakura shogunate in Japan marked a new phase in bilateral relations. During the Goryeo period, maritime trade between the two nations resumed, and Buddhist monks continued to travel across the sea. However, the rise of piracy along the coasts of both countries complicated relations. Woku, or Japanese pirates, frequently raided Korean shores from the 13th to 15th centuries, prompting defensive measures and military expeditions by the Goryeo and later Joseon governments. Diplomatic ties were sporadically maintained, but tensions often flared. During the Yuan dynasty's attempted invasions of Japan in the late 13th century, Korea, then under Mongol domination, was forced to supply ships and troops to the Mongol war effort. This placed Korea in a precarious position between two powerful neighbors. Although the invasions ultimately failed, they left a legacy of suspicion and militarization that persisted into the Joseon era. The early Joseon dynasty pursued a cautious diplomatic stance with Japan, balancing the need for peaceful coexistence with concerns about piracy and military aggression. Formal diplomatic missions, known as tongsinsa, were dispatched to the Ashikaga shogunate to stabilize relations and promote cultural exchange. These missions, comprising scholars, artists, and diplomats, reflected Joseon's commitment to Confucian ideals and its pride in its civilizational achievements. They also provided a channel for the exchange of books, paintings, and philosophical ideas. For a time, this cultural diplomacy flourished. Japanese elites admired Joseon's Confucian order and sought to learn from its administrative and moral systems. Korean emissaries reported on the political and social conditions of Japan, helping to shape perceptions on both sides. Despite differences in language and political organization, there was mutual recognition of each other's status as sophisticated civilizations. However, the underlying asymmetries in power and ambition would soon bring the two countries into direct conflict. The most cataclysmic episode in pre-modern Korea-Japan relations occurred during the Imjin War from 1592 to 1598. Toyotomi Hideyoshi, having unified Japan, sought to launch a military campaign to conquer Korea and use it as a springboard to invade China. The Japanese invasion began with a massive and well-coordinated assault that quickly overran much of the Korean peninsula. The Joseon army, caught off guard and hampered by internal divisions, suffered early defeats. However, the Korean resistance, bolstered by Ming Chinese reinforcements and led by heroic figures such as Admiral Yi Sun-sin, gradually turned the tide. Admiral Yi's innovative use of the turtle ship and his strategic naval victories disrupted Japanese supply lines and morale. The prolonged conflict devastated Korean cities, agriculture, and cultural heritage, including the loss of priceless archives and artworks. Though the Japanese forces eventually withdrew, the war left deep scars on the Korean psyche and fueled animosity toward Japan that persisted for centuries. The aftermath of the Imjin War prompted Joseon to strengthen its military and fortify its coastal defenses. Diplomatic relations with Japan were severed but cautiously resumed in the early 17th century. The Tokugawa shogunate, interested in restoring trade and stability, invited Joseon to send tongsinsa missions, which resumed in 1605. These missions continued intermittently for over 2 centuries and served as important conduits for diplomatic normalization and cultural exchange. Despite the memory of war, these renewed missions emphasized peaceful coexistence and Confucian brotherhood. Korean envoys were received with great ceremony in Edo, and their presence left a strong impression on Japanese society. Paintings, poetry, and scholarly records from these missions circulated among the Japanese literati, inspiring admiration and emulation. The Joseon envoys, in turn, documented Japanese customs, governance, and aesthetics with keen interest. These interactions revealed both commonalities and contrasts in the Confucian worldviews of each society. In the cultural sphere, both Korea and Japan developed rich and distinctive traditions influenced by shared sources such as Chinese literature, Confucian philosophy, and Mahayana Buddhism. Yet each adapted these influences in unique ways. Korean Confucianism emphasized social harmony, moral cultivation, and loyalty to family and state. Korean literature and art reflected a restrained elegance and a strong didactic ethos. In contrast, Japanese culture, while also influenced by Confucian and Buddhist ideals, incorporated a broader range of aesthetic expressions, including the warrior code of Bushido and a vibrant courtly tradition of poetry and painting. During the Edo period, Japan's policy of sakoku, or national seclusion, limited foreign contact but allowed selective engagement with Korea and the Dutch. Korea, known in Japan as the country of etiquette, remained one of the few states with which the Tokugawa regime maintained official ties. Trade continued through the Tsushima domain, which acted as an intermediary. This limited but steady interaction preserved channels of communication while insulating both societies from broader regional upheavals. The 19th century brought dramatic transformations as both Korea and Japan confronted the pressures of Western imperialism. Japan, following the Meiji Restoration in 1868, embarked on a rapid program of modernization and industrialization. It adopted Western technology, reformed its institutions, and projected military power abroad. Korea, under the late Joseon dynasty, remained more conservative, clinging to Confucian orthodoxy and resisting foreign influence. As Japan's power grew, its interest in Korea intensified. Viewing Korea as a strategic buffer and a resource-rich frontier, Japan sought to increase its influence through both diplomatic pressure and covert operations. In 1876, the Treaty of Ganghwa forced Korea to open its ports to Japanese trade, marking the beginning of modern imperial encroachment. The treaty, imposed under threat of naval force, undermined Joseon sovereignty and paved the way for further foreign intervention. The subsequent decades saw Korea become a contested arena for rival powers, including China, Russia, and Japan. Japan gradually asserted its dominance through economic penetration, political manipulation, and military intervention. The First Sino-Japanese War in 1894 and the Russo-Japanese War in 1904 further marginalized Chinese and Russian influence, leaving Japan as the dominant force in Korean affairs. In 1910, Japan formally annexed Korea, ending centuries of Joseon rule and inaugurating a harsh colonial regime. The Japanese occupation brought modernization in infrastructure and industry, but also brutal repression, forced assimilation, and cultural erasure. Korean language and history were suppressed, and resistance was met with severe punishment. The March 1st movement of 1919, a nationwide protest against Japanese rule, reflected the deep resentment and nationalistic fervor that had been building. During the colonial period, Japan attempted to reshape Korean identity through education, media, and economic policy. Some Koreans collaborated, while others resisted through underground movements, exile activism, and armed struggle. The experience of colonization left a profound trauma that shaped Korean nationalism and anti-Japanese sentiment for generations. Even after liberation in 1945, the legacy of occupation continued to affect diplomatic relations and historical memory. In the post-war era, Japan and Korea embarked on divergent paths. Japan emerged as a democratic and economically powerful nation, allied with the United States. Korea, divided into North and South, experienced war and dictatorship before eventually becoming a thriving democracy in the South. Formal diplomatic relations between South Korea and Japan were established in 1965 through the Treaty on Basic Relations, but historical grievances, particularly regarding colonial atrocities and wartime sexual slavery, continued to strain ties. Despite political tensions, the late 20th and early 21st centuries saw renewed cultural and economic exchanges. Japanese popular culture, including manga, anime, and music, found a large audience in Korea. Conversely, the Korean Wave, or Hallyu, introduced Korean dramas, K-pop, and cinema to Japanese fans. Trade and tourism flourished, and academic collaborations deepened mutual understanding. Yet nationalist rhetoric and unresolved historical issues often rekindled diplomatic disputes. Contemporary Japan-Korea relations remain a complex mix of partnership and contention. Economic interdependence and shared democratic values provide a foundation for cooperation, particularly in regional security and international diplomacy. Both countries face common challenges, including aging populations, geopolitical instability, and the threat posed by North Korea's nuclear program. Trilateral cooperation with the United States offers strategic opportunities for alignment. Nevertheless, public sentiment in both nations remains ambivalent. Historical revisionism, political provocations, and the unresolved status of wartime reparations continue to inflame public opinion. Efforts at reconciliation, such as joint historical commissions and cultural diplomacy, have had mixed results. National identity, shaped by centuries of interaction and conflict, remains a sensitive issue that complicates the search for common ground. The relationship between Japan and Korea has been defined by a dynamic interplay of diplomacy, cultural exchange, and conflict. Their shared history is marked by both mutual enrichment and painful confrontation. Understanding this history in all its complexity is essential for building a more constructive and empathetic partnership in the future. While the past cannot be undone, a deeper appreciation of each other's experiences, values, and aspirations may pave the way for a more peaceful and cooperative coexistence in East Asia. The modern history of Japan and Korea is dominated by a shared memory of colonial rule, war, and the ongoing struggle for reconciliation. While their ancient and medieval interactions were defined by cultural exchange and conflict, it is the colonial experience of the 20th century that has cast the longest and most painful shadow. From the annexation of Korea by Japan in 1910 to the turbulent process of post-war reconstruction and attempts at diplomatic rapprochement, the legacy of modern imperialism continues to shape contemporary perceptions and policies in both countries. This chapter examines the colonial period, the Korean struggle for independence, the aftermath of World War II, and the ongoing efforts at reconciliation in the post-war decades. Japan's formal annexation of Korea in 1910 followed a decade of increasing political manipulation, economic influence, and military presence. After the First Sino-Japanese War in 1894 and the Russo-Japanese War in 1904, Japan emerged as the dominant regional power. The Japan-Korea Treaty of 1910, signed under duress, marked the beginning of 3.5 decades of colonial rule that profoundly altered the Korean peninsula. Japanese administrators established a centralized, authoritarian regime, dismantling the existing Joseon monarchy and replacing it with a colonial government headquartered in Seoul. The initial phase of Japanese rule was marked by harsh repression and forced assimilation. Korean language and culture were suppressed, and political dissent was met with brutal crackdowns. Land surveys and economic reforms benefited Japanese interests while displacing Korean farmers. Schools promoted Japanese language and loyalty to the emperor, and public life was increasingly regulated to erase Korean identity. This period of cultural imperialism aimed not only at economic exploitation, but also at redefining Korean consciousness to serve the Japanese empire. Despite these efforts, Korean resistance persisted in many forms. Underground nationalist movements, student protests, and cultural preservation efforts kept the spirit of independence alive. One of the most significant events during the colonial period was the March 1st movement of 1919. Sparked by the death of former Emperor Gojong and inspired by global calls for self-determination following World War I, the movement saw peaceful protests erupt across Korea. Japanese authorities responded with violent suppression, killing thousands and imprisoning many more. While the uprising failed to achieve immediate political change, it galvanized nationalist sentiment and drew international attention to Korea's plight. In response to the global outcry and to improve its international image, Japan shifted its colonial policy in the 1920s. The so-called cultural policy era introduced limited reforms, allowing for some Korean participation in governance, media, and education. However, these changes were largely superficial, and real power remained firmly in Japanese hands. The Korean economy was increasingly integrated into the Japanese empire, with infrastructure and industry developed primarily for imperial benefit. The outbreak of World War II brought intensified mobilization and exploitation of Korea. Under the wartime regime, Koreans were drafted into military service, forced to work in mines and factories, and subjected to increased cultural suppression. Perhaps the most infamous aspect of this period was the coercion of thousands of Korean women into sexual slavery euphemistically referred to as comfort women, to serve Japanese soldiers. This atrocity remains one of the most contentious and painful issues in Japan-Korea relations to this day. The end of World War II in 1945 brought liberation to Korea, but not without complications. With Japan's surrender, Korea was divided at the 38th parallel into Soviet and American zones of occupation. This division, initially meant to be temporary, solidified into the establishment of two separate states in 1948, the Republic of Korea in the south and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea in the north. The Korean War from 1950 to 1953 further deepened this division and devastated the peninsula. While the war was largely a civil conflict, it was also a proxy war in the broader Cold War context, with China and the Soviet Union supporting the North and the United States leading a United Nations coalition to support the South. Japan, meanwhile, was occupied by Allied forces under American leadership and underwent a sweeping transformation. The post-war period saw the demilitarization of Japanese society, the drafting of a new pacifist constitution, and the rebuilding of its economy. While the war crimes of the Japanese Empire were prosecuted in the Tokyo trials, many Koreans felt that justice was incomplete, particularly regarding colonial-era abuses. The issue of compensation for forced labor, military service, and sexual slavery remained unresolved. Formal diplomatic relations between South Korea and Japan were not restored until 1965 with the signing of the Treaty on Basic Relations. This agreement recognized South Korea as the sole legitimate government of the Korean peninsula and provided economic aid in the form of grants and loans. However, the treaty did not fully address the historical grievances stemming from the colonial period. Many South Koreans criticized the agreement as a product of Cold War realpolitik, made under the authoritarian leadership of Park Chung-hee and without public consultation. Throughout the late 20th century, the memory of colonial rule remained a powerful force in South Korean society. Textbooks, media, and public discourse reflected a deep-seated resentment toward Japan. Annual commemorations of the March 1st movement and other resistance efforts served as reminders of past suffering and sacrifice. Cultural depictions of Japanese brutality and Korean heroism became central to the construction of modern Korean national identity. At the same time, Japanese narratives often emphasized post-war pacifism and economic development, with less focus on imperial history. Efforts at reconciliation have taken many forms over the decades. In 1993, Chief Cabinet Secretary Yohei Kono issued a statement acknowledging the coercion of comfort women and expressing remorse. 2 years later, Prime Minister Tomichi Murayama formally apologized for Japan's colonial aggression in Asia. These gestures were welcomed by some in Korea, but were often undermined by contradictory statements from other Japanese officials or by actions such as visits to the Yasukuni Shrine, which honors war dead, including convicted war criminals. The lack of a unified, consistent stance from Japan's political leadership has made sustained reconciliation difficult. Civil society initiatives have played a vital role in fostering dialogue and understanding. Korean and Japanese historians have engaged in joint research projects to produce balanced accounts of shared history. Exchange programs, peace museums, and advocacy groups have worked to bridge the divide between the two nations. Survivors of wartime abuses, especially former comfort women, have become powerful voices for justice, keeping the issue in the public eye and demanding formal recognition and reparation. The 21st century has seen both progress and setbacks in Japan-Korea relations. On the one hand, there have been significant cultural and economic exchanges. The Korean Wave, or Hallyu, has brought Korean dramas, music, and fashion to Japanese audiences. Japanese anime and technology remain popular in South Korea. Bilateral trade, tourism, and academic collaboration have grown, creating a web of interdependence that contrasts sharply with political tensions. On the other hand, historical issues continue to resurface. Disputes over school textbook content, wartime compensation, and territorial claims to the Dokdo Islets, called Takeshima in Japan, have led to diplomatic standoffs. In 2015, Japan and South Korea reached a landmark agreement to resolve the comfort women issue, including a Japanese apology and a fund for survivors. However, the deal was criticized in Korea for lacking survivor input, and subsequent administrations distanced themselves from its terms. Court rulings in South Korea demanding compensation for forced labor further strained ties, prompting Japan to impose export restrictions, which in turn sparked boycotts of Japanese products in Korea. Public opinion in both countries remains divided. Many South Koreans feel that Japan has not sufficiently atoned for its imperial past, while many Japanese view the repeated demands for apology and compensation as excessive. This impasse is rooted not only in historical grievances, but also in the differing national narratives and educational systems that shape collective memory. While some progress has been made, genuine reconciliation requires more than diplomatic agreements. It demands empathy, honesty, and sustained engagement at all levels of society. The generational shift offers both challenges and opportunities. Younger Koreans and Japanese, who did not experience war or colonization firsthand, often express more interest in cultural exchange than in historical disputes. Yet their understanding of history is shaped by the narratives passed down through education and media. Digital platforms, joint documentaries, and social media campaigns have emerged as new tools for cross-cultural dialogue. By fostering grassroots connections and shared experiences, these platforms can play a crucial role in reshaping perceptions. Looking forward, the path to reconciliation lies in mutual recognition of historical truths and the dignity of those who suffered. Official apologies must be accompanied by consistent policies and sincere actions. Education systems in both countries must promote critical engagement with history rather than nationalistic myths. Memorials, museums, and public discourse should honor the victims while promoting a vision of peace and cooperation. The legacy of colonial rule and war cannot be erased, but it can be understood, contextualized, and addressed with humility and compassion. For Japan and Korea, building a future of reconciliation requires confronting the past not as a burden to be denied or forgotten, but as a shared history to be acknowledged and learned from. Only through this process can the wounds of the 20th century begin to heal and give way to a new era of mutual respect and solidarity. The cultural legacy and historical memory of Japan and Korea continue to reverberate into the present, manifesting in political discourse, public education, artistic expression, and popular culture. The deep roots of their intertwined histories have not only shaped national identities, but have also affected bilateral relations, civic consciousness, and the collective imagination of both nations. In this chapter, we explore how the legacy of the world's oldest monarchy in Japan and the Confucian dynasties of Korea, Goryeo, and Joseon continue to inform modern society. We also examine how historical memory functions as a living force, shaping the cultural narratives and political realities of contemporary Japan and Korea. In Japan, the imperial institution has undergone a remarkable transformation. From a divine sovereign at the helm of an expansive empire to a symbolic figurehead in a democratic state, the emperor remains central to Japanese national identity. The Chrysanthemum throne, representing continuity, stability, and unity, has become a powerful symbol that transcends political shifts. The reigning emperor does not wield political power, but serves as a cultural and spiritual emblem, reinforcing traditional values and collective memory. The legacy of Imperial Japan is preserved in ceremonial rituals, Shinto practices, and state functions. The Japanese people continue to observe national holidays that celebrate the imperial family, including the emperor's birthday and foundation day. These observances are imbued with centuries-old traditions that reinforce a sense of historical continuity. Museums, imperial archives, and cultural institutions protect and display artifacts that trace the lineage of the imperial house back to the mythological age, cultivating a national narrative rooted in antiquity. In modern Korea, the Confucian values inherited from the Goryeo and Joseon dynasties still exert significant influence. These dynasties, which emphasized hierarchy, education, filial piety, and civil service, laid the foundation for a highly literate and bureaucratic society. Today, Confucian ethics continue to shape family structures, workplace dynamics, and educational practices in both South and North Korea. Respect for elders, academic achievement, and social harmony remain core cultural values, often reinforced through rituals and daily customs. Public memory of the Joseon dynasty is particularly strong in South Korea. Historical dramas, films, and novels frequently portray the intrigues of the royal court, the struggles of Confucian scholars, and the moral dilemmas of monarchs and officials. The popularity of these cultural products illustrates how dynastic heritage remains alive in the public imagination. Sites such as Gyeongbokgung Palace and Jongmyo Shrine serve not only as tourist attractions, but also as symbols of national pride and continuity. Historical memory in both Japan and Korea is actively constructed and contested through education. In Japan, textbooks have been at the center of controversy over how the country's imperial past and wartime actions are portrayed. Debates over historical revisionism, nationalist narratives, and the representation of colonial history have polarized public opinion. Some textbooks minimize or omit Japan's aggression in Asia, leading to criticism from neighboring countries, especially Korea and China. Others take a more critical stance, emphasizing the consequences of militarism and imperial expansion. In South Korea, history education tends to emphasize the resilience and resistance of the Korean people. Textbooks and school curricula often highlight the achievements of the Goryeo and Joseon dynasties, the suffering under Japanese colonial rule, and the nation's recovery and modernization. These narratives foster a strong sense of national identity grounded in endurance and moral integrity. However, debates over ideological bias and political influence in textbook production reveal that historical memory remains a dynamic and contested domain. Popular culture plays a crucial role in shaping and disseminating historical memory. In Japan, the enduring appeal of samurai films, period dramas, and manga that depict the Tokugawa shogunate or the Meiji Restoration reflects a fascination with feudal values, national pride, and heroic sacrifice. While some of these works romanticize the past, others offer critical perspectives on class, gender, and authority. Anime series often incorporate historical motifs and symbols, allowing younger audiences to engage with history in imaginative and accessible ways. In Korea, the Korean wave has become a powerful vehicle for cultural memory. Historical dramas, or seijik, are among the most popular genres in Korean television, blending historical authenticity with dramatic storytelling. These dramas often depict figures from the Goryeo and Joseon periods, such as King Sejong, Queen Seondeok, or Admiral Lee Sun-sin, portraying them as paragons of wisdom, courage, and patriotism. By humanizing historical icons and exploring their personal struggles, these dramas reinforce a collective memory of resilience, innovation, and national pride. Commemorative practices also play a vital role in preserving historical memory. In Japan, the annual Hiroshima and Nagasaki memorials serve as solemn reminders of the devastation of war and the importance of peace. The emperor's participation in these ceremonies reinforces his symbolic role as a moral leader and a custodian of memory. Similarly, war museums and peace parks provide spaces for reflection, education, and remembrance, although they sometimes attract criticism for focusing on Japan's victimhood rather than its responsibility. In South Korea, March 1st Movement Day, Liberation Day, and other national holidays commemorate the struggle for independence and the end of colonial rule. Public events, reenactments, and educational programs engage citizens in remembering and honoring the sacrifices of previous generations. Monuments, museums, and memorial halls dedicated to independence activists, comfort women, and wartime laborers ensure that their stories remain part of the national consciousness. The preservation and presentation of historical sites further illustrate how cultural legacy is maintained. In Japan, UNESCO World Heritage Sites such as Himeji Castle, Kyoto temples, and the Hiroshima Peace Memorial serve as tangible links to the past. Efforts to conserve these sites are supported by both government and civic organizations, reflecting a commitment to cultural heritage. In Korea, the restoration of palaces, temples, and Confucian academies has become a national priority. Projects to revive traditional architecture and practices aim to reconnect modern Koreans with their historical roots. Museums in both countries function as critical spaces for engaging with history. The National Museum of Korea in Seoul houses artifacts from the Goryeo and Joseon dynasties, offering visitors a comprehensive view of Korea's dynastic heritage. Interactive exhibits, digital reconstructions, and educational programs make history accessible and relevant. In Japan, the National Museum in Tokyo and the Kyoto National Museum provide extensive collections of art, documents, and relics that trace the development of Japanese civilization and the evolution of the imperial institution. Diasporic communities also contribute to the preservation and transformation of cultural memory. Korean diaspora in countries such as the United States, China, and Japan maintain cultural practices and commemorate historical events through community organizations, language schools, and cultural festivals. Japanese diaspora similarly engage in efforts to preserve traditional arts, language, and imperial customs. These communities act as bridges between cultures, fostering transnational memory and dialogue. Digital technology has revolutionized the way historical memory is created and shared. Online archives, virtual museums, and social media platforms allow individuals to access and contribute to historical narratives. In Korea, digital storytelling projects have collected testimonies from comfort women and independence activists, ensuring that their voices are preserved for future generations. In Japan, virtual reconstructions of historical sites and digital exhibitions have expanded public engagement with cultural heritage. However, the digital age also presents challenges. The spread of misinformation, the politicization of history, and the amplification of nationalistic rhetoric can distort historical understanding. Online debates and comment wars between Japanese and Korean netizens over historical issues illustrate how digital spaces can both facilitate and hinder reconciliation. The role of digital literacy and critical thinking becomes crucial in navigating these complex terrains. Literature and the arts serve as powerful mediums for exploring and contesting historical memory. Japanese novelists such as Yukio Mishima, Haruki Murakami, and Kenzaburo Oe have grappled with themes of identity, memory, and imperial legacy. Korean authors like Hwang Sakyong, Kim Young-ha, and Han Kong have addressed the traumas of colonization, war, and division. These works transcend national borders and invite readers to engage with history on a personal and emotional level. Art exhibitions, theater productions, and public performances also contribute to the ongoing dialogue between past and present. Collaborative projects between Japanese and Korean artists have addressed themes of loss, resilience, and reconciliation. By creating spaces for shared expression and mutual understanding, the arts play a vital role in healing historical wounds and imagining new possibilities. Youth engagement is essential for sustaining cultural legacy and fostering a more nuanced understanding of history. Educational exchanges, youth forums, and international conferences provide platforms for dialogue and collaboration. Programs that bring together Japanese and Korean students encourage empathy, critical inquiry, and cross-cultural friendships. These initiatives challenge stereotypes and cultivate a generation that values historical truth and mutual respect. Government policies and diplomatic efforts continue to influence how historical memory is managed. In both Japan and Korea, political leaders invoke historical narratives to legitimize policies, mobilize public support, or assert national identity. While such narratives can foster pride and cohesion, they can also entrench divisions and provoke diplomatic tensions. Efforts to depoliticize history and promote balanced education are essential for building constructive international relations. Non-governmental organizations, academics, and peace activists play a vital role in promoting historical dialogue. Joint history commissions, truth commissions, and international symposia have sought to bridge gaps in understanding and establish common ground. While consensus is often difficult, these efforts underscore the importance of collaborative inquiry and shared responsibility. The cultural legacy and historical memory of Japan and Korea continue to shape their societies in profound ways. The enduring influence of the Japanese monarchy and the Confucian dynasties of Korea is evident in traditions, institutions, and values. At the same time, the memory of colonialism, war, and division remains a powerful force in public discourse and bilateral relations. By engaging critically and empathetically with the past, both nations can cultivate a historical consciousness that honors their heritage while fostering reconciliation and cooperation. The echoes of history are not just remnants of bygone eras, but living voices that challenge, inspire, and guide the present and future. As Japan and Korea navigate the complexities of the 21st century, the enduring legacies of the Chrysanthemum throne and the Confucian Han-based heritage continue to shape their visions of the future. The challenge for both nations is to reconcile deep-rooted historical traditions with the demands of modern democracy, international diplomacy, and a rapidly changing global landscape. We explore how Japan's imperial institution and Korea's Confucian legacy might evolve, adapt, and interact in the decades to come. We examine the generational shifts in attitudes, the role of youth, the implications of globalization, and the prospects for regional cooperation based on shared cultural and historical foundations. The Japanese monarchy, considered the oldest hereditary institution in the world, stands today at a crossroads. With Emperor Naruhito ascending the throne in 2019, a new era began Reiwa, meaning beautiful harmony. The symbolism of the emperor has shifted markedly from divine ruler to constitutional figurehead, yet the institution retains significant cultural and emotional resonance for many Japanese. The emperor is seen as a symbol of national continuity, tradition, and moral unity, even as modern Japanese society becomes increasingly diverse and secular. The challenges facing the imperial family are multifaceted. Demographic decline, gender roles, and succession debates have raised questions about the institution's long-term viability. The shrinking number of male heirs within the imperial household has reignited discussions about allowing women to ascend the throne. While a majority of the Japanese public supports female succession, conservative factions continue to resist changes that would alter traditional rules of inheritance. The debate reflects broader societal tensions between tradition and progress, and its resolution will likely influence the monarchy's future legitimacy and relevance. Moreover, younger generations of Japanese view the monarchy with a mix of respect, indifference, and curiosity. For some, the emperor embodies cultural pride and national identity. For others, he represents an outdated institution disconnected from everyday life. Public engagements by Emperor Naruhito and Empress Masako, particularly their focus on peace, empathy, and social issues, have helped humanize the monarchy and reconnect it with contemporary values. Their participation in commemorative events and international diplomacy underscores the evolving role of the imperial family as cultural ambassadors and moral voices. In Korea, the legacy of the Confucian dynasties, especially the Joseon period, continues to inform the nation's social fabric and institutional structures. The emphasis on education, meritocracy, family values, and respect for authority remains deeply embedded in Korean society. However, just as in Japan, generational change and globalization are prompting a re-evaluation of traditional norms. Younger Koreans are increasingly questioning hierarchical structures, gender roles, and the intense pressure of academic and professional achievement rooted in Confucian ideals. South Korea's rapid modernization has led to a paradoxical relationship with its Confucian heritage. On one hand, it is celebrated as the foundation of Korea's work ethic, civic order, and emphasis on learning. On the other hand, it is critiqued for perpetuating rigid social expectations and inhibiting individual expression. The tension between collectivist values and liberal democratic aspirations defines much of contemporary Korean discourse. Cultural products, public debates, and youth movements reflect this ongoing negotiation between past and present. North Korea presents a different but related trajectory. While officially rooted in Marxist-Leninist and Jewish ideologies, the North Korean regime has adopted a dynastic model reminiscent of monarchical Confucian states. The ruling Kim family is venerated in a quasi-religious manner, with rituals and iconography that echo both imperial and Confucian traditions. The regime uses historical symbolism to legitimize its rule, constructing a narrative of continuity, resistance, and sovereignty that appeals to deep cultural archetypes. Looking forward, both South and North Korea face the challenge of integrating historical identity with modern governance. In the South, democratic institutions continue to evolve, with growing demands for transparency, inclusion, and social justice. Movements for gender equality, labor rights, and educational reform are reshaping the cultural landscape. The Confucian legacy will likely persist, but in a transformed, pluralistic form that accommodates diverse perspectives and values. In both Japan and Korea, the role of youth will be decisive. Millennials and Generation Z, shaped by digital technology, global culture, and social activism, are less bound by historical animosities and more inclined toward cosmopolitan outlooks. They engage with history not only through formal education, but also through documentaries, online platforms, and pop culture. Their attitudes toward the monarchy and Confucianism are pragmatic and dynamic, valuing tradition when it offers meaning, but willing to challenge it when it restricts freedom or progress. Education will remain a crucial arena for shaping future narratives. In Japan, there is a growing movement to modernize history education, incorporating multiple perspectives and encouraging critical thinking. Schools and universities are re-evaluating curricula to ensure a more balanced and inclusive portrayal of the imperial past and regional history. In Korea, Efforts to depoliticize textbooks and promote academic freedom are ongoing, despite political polarization. Cross-border academic exchanges and joint history projects between Japanese and Korean scholars have shown promise in building mutual understanding. Technology and media are also redefining the ways cultural legacy is transmitted. Virtual reality experiences, interactive exhibits, and AI-powered archives allow new generations to engage with history in immersive ways. Museums in both countries are adopting digital tools to bring ancient traditions and modern reflections together. Social media influencers, content creators, and independent journalists play a growing role in shaping historical consciousness, often bypassing traditional gatekeepers and offering alternative interpretations. The political future of the Chrysanthemum throne and the Confucian legacy will also depend on the broader geopolitical environment. Regional tensions, security alliances, and international diplomacy will influence how Japan and Korea position themselves historically and culturally. The rise of China as a regional power, the continued presence of the United States, and the instability on the Korean peninsula create a complex backdrop against which national identities are asserted and contested. Japan's diplomatic use of the imperial institution as a soft power asset could increase in the coming years. Royal visits, cultural exchanges, and peace-building initiatives led by the emperor and empress may help enhance Japan's global image and regional ties. Similarly, Korea's emphasis on its Confucian heritage and historical resilience can be harnessed to promote cultural diplomacy, educational partnerships, and regional cooperation. Initiatives that highlight shared East Asian traditions could foster unity and reduce antagonism. The prospect of reconciliation between Japan and Korea hinges, in part, on how historical legacies are addressed and honored. Official apologies, commemorative gestures, and inclusive dialogues must be coupled with institutional reforms and educational efforts. Civil society, particularly youth-led organizations, has a vital role to play in promoting understanding and empathy. Events that bring together descendants of historical figures, survivors of colonial trauma, and modern artists can create powerful spaces for healing and collaboration. Moreover, climate change, technological disruption, and global inequality pose common challenges that transcend historical grievances. Japan and Korea, both technologically advanced and culturally rich nations, are well-positioned to lead regional and global initiatives. Collaborative responses to environmental crises, pandemics, and digital governance can forge new bonds based on shared values and mutual interests. These future-oriented endeavors can reframe historical memory not as a source of division, but as a foundation for solidarity. The symbolic weight of the chrysanthemum and the Han remains potent. They represent not only historical institutions, but also cultural archetypes: order, dignity, learning, and continuity. As both nations evolve, these symbols must be reinterpreted in ways that speak to contemporary aspirations. Artistic innovation, scholarly reinterpretation, and inclusive public discourse can breathe new life into ancient traditions, making them relevant and empowering. In Japan, the possibility of a modern monarchy that champions human rights, environmental stewardship, and cultural diversity is emerging. Emperor Naruhito's public concern for water conservation, climate awareness, and historical responsibility suggests a model of leadership rooted not in authority, but in empathy and vision. The imperial family can become a moral compass for a society in transition, guiding it through uncertainty with grace and wisdom. In Korea, the Confucian legacy can be a source of ethical guidance and civic engagement, provided it is adapted to modern values of equality, inclusivity, and pluralism. The emphasis on education and public service remains a powerful tool for social progress. Confucian ideals of harmony, benevolence, and justice can inspire new approaches to governance, conflict resolution, and social cohesion. Ultimately, the future of the chrysanthemum and the Han depends on the choices made by citizens, educators, leaders, and artists. It depends on whether history is used to entrench divisions or to illuminate common ground. It depends on the willingness to acknowledge pain without being defined by it, to celebrate heritage without being confined by it. The power of these legacies lies not in their unchanging form, but in their capacity to inspire, adapt, and endure. As Japan and Korea stand on the threshold of new epochs, their ancient traditions offer both challenges and opportunities. The chrysanthemum may no longer command armies or dictate law, but it can still evoke the beauty of harmony and the strength of continuity. The Confucian scrolls may not govern court bureaucracy, but they can still remind us of the value of wisdom, integrity, and community. In embracing the past while forging ahead, both nations have the chance to redefine their identities not in opposition, but in cooperation. The echoes of imperial majesty and Confucian morality continue to resonate. They are not mere relics of the past, but living elements of a dynamic cultural tapestry. If nurtured with insight and humility, they can help shape a future where tradition and progress walk hand in hand, and where Japan and Korea find not only reconciliation but renewal. The influence of imperial traditions in Japan and Confucian legacies in Korea on modern political culture is profound and enduring, subtly shaping governance, leadership ethics, public expectations, and institutional behavior. Despite the adoption of modern democratic systems and capitalist economies, both nations carry distinct markers of their historical frameworks that continue to inform contemporary politics and social structures. This chapter explores how imperial and Confucian legacies manifest in modern Japan and Korea, examining their impact on political norms, administrative behavior, public engagement, and national identity. In Japan, the Chrysanthemum throne is constitutionally symbolic, yet its presence influences the cultural underpinnings of political life. The emperor no longer possesses legal authority, but his role as a unifying symbol of the state reinforces a sense of continuity and national cohesion. The emperor's ceremonial duties, participation in commemorations, and involvement in post-disaster empathy visits imbue politics with a moral and human dimension that extends beyond policy. These activities serve to bridge the emotional distance between the people and the government, helping to stabilize the polity during times of social strain. The Japanese bureaucracy, renowned for its efficiency and professionalism, owes much to the Confucian-inspired traditions of hierarchical order, merit-based advancement, and a sense of duty to the public good. Although Confucianism was never as formally entrenched in Japan as in Korea or China, its principles filtered into political culture via education and ethical codes. Public service is often regarded as a noble calling, and bureaucrats are expected to embody integrity, discipline, and discretion. This legacy contributes to Japan's relative political stability and low levels of corruption compared to many other democracies. Similarly, leadership styles in Japan exhibit a preference for consensus building, modesty, and avoidance of confrontation traits aligned with Confucian and imperial ideals of harmony and moral leadership. Politicians often present themselves not as charismatic populists, but as diligent stewards of the nation, emphasizing continuity, respect for tradition, and collective welfare. These tendencies are evident in both local and national politics, where political rhetoric tends to be cautious, and change is often incremental rather than revolutionary. However, Japan's modern political challenges also reflect the tension between traditional values and contemporary demands. Issues such as gender equality, transparency, and citizen participation continue to push against long-standing norms. The role of women in politics remains limited, in part due to enduring social expectations rooted in both imperial patriarchy and Confucian gender roles. Efforts to reform the political system, including electoral reform, decentralization, and administrative modernization, must contend with these ingrained cultural attitudes. In South Korea, Confucianism has exerted a more direct and structured influence on modern governance, especially during the formation of state institutions after liberation from Japanese rule. The Joseon dynasty's legacy of scholar officials, civil service exams, and filial piety shaped the foundational ethos of the Republic of Korea. Confucian values such as loyalty, hierarchy, respect for authority, and communal responsibility continue to permeate political and organizational behavior. One of the most visible manifestations of Confucian influence in South Korean politics is the emphasis on education and credentialism. Political leaders, public officials, and corporate executives are often judged based on academic pedigree and professional qualifications, a practice rooted in the Joseon era's civil examination system. The value placed on scholarly achievement contributes to a highly competitive educational environment, where success in elite institutions translates into political capital and social status. Confucian hierarchical norms also shape organizational culture in both public and private sectors. Seniority, loyalty, and deference to authority often define internal dynamics, leading to a top-down approach in decision-making. This can foster stability and clear lines of responsibility, but may also inhibit innovation, critical feedback, and rapid responsiveness. Reform movements in recent decades have sought to balance these traditions with democratic principles of accountability, transparency, and citizen participation. South Korea's political leadership has historically been characterized by paternalistic governance, where presidents are seen as moral guardians and national patriarchs. This conception echoes the Confucian ideal of the virtuous ruler, whose personal integrity and vision legitimize their authority. However, such expectations can backfire when leaders fall short, as seen in several high-profile corruption scandals and impeachments. The disillusionment that follows often catalyzes civic activism, demanding greater checks and balances. Indeed, one of the most notable developments in Korean political culture is the rise of civil society and youth-led movements. While Confucian values historically emphasized obedience and social harmony, modern Koreans, especially the younger generations, are increasingly asserting their rights, challenging authority, and advocating for justice. The candlelight protests of 2016 and 2017, which led to the impeachment of President Park Geun-hye, demonstrated a profound shift in public consciousness and engagement. Yet, even this activism draws on Confucian principles, reframing loyalty and righteousness as moral obligations to oppose corrupt or unjust rulers. In both Japan and Korea, historical memory plays a critical role in shaping political identity. In Japan, the emperor's presence offers a continuous thread through various regimes, wars, and transformations, providing a sense of cultural stability. In Korea, the memory of dynastic Confucian governance reinforces national pride, moral resilience, and the importance of learning and civic duty. Political narratives often invoke historical parallels, drawing lessons from past dynasties, reforms, and national struggles. The interaction between historical tradition and contemporary politics is especially evident in rituals, symbols, and commemorations. In Japan, national holidays, royal ceremonies, and state functions frequently incorporate elements of imperial tradition, subtly reinforcing loyalty to the state. Similarly, in Korea, national monuments, ancestral rites, and memorial days honor Confucian values of respect for ancestors, sacrifice, and moral leadership. These public expressions contribute to a shared cultural political identity that resonates across generations. Yet, both nations face challenges in reconciling these traditional frameworks with the demands of pluralistic and participatory democracy. In Japan, voter apathy, especially among younger citizens, has prompted concerns about political disengagement. Critics argue that the culture of deference and consensus may suppress dissent and hinder responsive governance. Reform advocates call for greater transparency, citizen oversight, and the empowerment of local governments to revitalize democratic practice. In Korea, the legacy of authoritarian rule and rapid modernization has produced a highly politicized society, where ideological polarization and institutional distrust can undermine social cohesion. While Confucian ethics continue to inform political discourse, there is a growing recognition of the need to adapt these values to a democratic context. Efforts to reform the judiciary, media, and electoral systems often invoke the Confucian ideal of just and virtuous governance, but also push for more inclusive, equitable, and participatory mechanisms. The international dimension adds another layer to the influence of imperial and Confucian legacies. Both Japan and Korea engage in cultural diplomacy that highlights their historical traditions as sources of soft power. Japan's imperial heritage, aesthetic refinement, and philosophical restraint are promoted through global cultural initiatives, museums, and tourism. Korea's Confucian-based educational excellence, family values, and civic ethics are similarly showcased in global forums, media, and diaspora networks. Moreover, the historical interplay between Japan and Korea continues to influence bilateral relations. Debates over historical memory, wartime responsibility, and territorial disputes are often framed through the lens of past imperialism and Confucian moral judgment. Political leaders must navigate these sensitive issues with a blend of historical awareness and future-oriented diplomacy. Joint academic projects, cultural exchanges, and interfaith or interheritage dialogues offer promising avenues for mutual understanding. The digital era is reshaping the transmission of political culture and historical tradition. In Japan, online platforms are used by both the state and civil society to discuss constitutional issues, imperial succession, and public policy. In Korea, digital activism, virtual learning, and social media debates reflect a dynamic interplay between Confucian values and democratic engagement. Youth are increasingly turning to podcasts, YouTube channels, and online forums to explore political philosophy, civic duty, and historical interpretation. Art and literature also serve as mediums through which imperial and Confucian legacies are interrogated and reimagined. Japanese novels, films, and manga often grapple with themes of duty, sacrifice, and moral ambiguity, drawing on imperial motifs. Korean dramas, literature, and cinema frequently depict Confucian family dynamics, ethical dilemmas, and the tension between tradition and modernity. These cultural forms contribute to a vibrant public sphere where historical influences are actively discussed and reinterpreted. Looking forward, the influence of imperial and Confucian traditions on political culture will likely persist, though not in static or uniform ways. They will evolve in response to generational change, technological innovation, and global interconnectedness. The key challenge for both nations is to preserve the ethical and communal strengths of their traditions while ensuring they do not hinder progress, equality, or innovation. Educational reform, civic education, and inclusive policymaking will be essential. Curricula that encourage critical engagement with tradition, rather than rote reverence, can foster a politically aware and culturally grounded citizenry. Leadership development programs that balance historical insight with democratic skills can cultivate a new generation of public servants who honor their heritage while embracing change. Ultimately, imperial and Confucian influences are not obstacles to modern political culture, but resources that can be harnessed with care and creativity. They offer moral frameworks, historical depth, and communal ethos that, when adapted wisely, can enhance democratic governance, social responsibility, and national unity. As Japan and Korea continue to navigate the complexities of the 21st century, the enduring echoes of their imperial and Confucian pasts will remain integral to their political futures. Symbolism plays a profound role in shaping national identity, especially in countries with rich historical legacies such as Japan and Korea. From imperial rituals to Confucian rites, from royal emblems to civic monuments, symbolic expressions serve as cultural touchstones that bind citizens together across time and social divisions. In Japan, the symbolism of the chrysanthemum throne continues to embody national unity and cultural continuity. In Korea, Confucian traditions underpin a collective sense of moral responsibility and historical resilience. This chapter examines how symbols drawn from imperial and Confucian heritage contribute to modern constructions of identity and cohesion in both nations. Japan's chrysanthemum throne is perhaps the most enduring and recognizable symbol of the nation's continuity. Though stripped of political power after World War II, the emperor remains a unifying figure whose presence represents the cultural soul of the country. The imperial family is often portrayed as living embodiments of Japanese values such as harmony, endurance, and dignity. Ceremonial appearances, seasonal greetings, and public statements by the emperor often carry symbolic significance that resonates far beyond their literal content. The symbolism of the emperor is deeply embedded in state rituals and public life. National holidays like the emperor's birthday and ceremonial events, such as enthronement rituals, reinforce the sacred image of the throne, even within a secular constitutional framework. These events serve as national moments of reflection, continuity, and collective identity. The architecture of the imperial palaces, the design of imperial regalia, and the use of symbols such as the chrysanthemum crest permeate state iconography, reinforcing a sense of timeless connection between the people and the monarchy. The Japanese flag itself, a red sun on a white field, reflects both Shinto cosmology and imperial symbolism. Known as the Nishoki or Hinomaru, it represents the sun goddess Amaterasu, from whom the imperial family is mythologically descended. Its presence at school ceremonies, government buildings, and international events underscores a national identity rooted in both ancient myth and modern sovereignty. Though the flag and national anthem have at times been sources of controversy, particularly due to wartime associations, they continue to serve as powerful markers of national pride and unity. In the realm of popular culture, imperial symbolism finds expression in everything from literature and anime to architecture and tourism. Historical dramas, novels, and films often revisit themes of loyalty, sacrifice, and moral duty associated with the imperial past. Shrines, such as the Ise Grand Shrine dedicated to Amaterasu, attract millions of visitors, and offer a living link to ancestral heritage. These sites are not merely tourist attractions, but loci of spiritual and national significance, where the past is continually reimagined in the present. Korea, on the other hand, draws heavily on Confucian symbols to articulate national identity and social cohesion. While there is no modern monarchy in South Korea, the legacy of the Goryeo and Joseon dynasties endures through Confucian rites, family rituals, and educational values. The emphasis on respect for elders, reverence for ancestors, and ethical governance are all underpinned by symbolic traditions that trace their origins to Confucian thought. These symbols manifest not only in ceremonial contexts, but also in everyday interactions and institutional behaviors. Confucian symbolism is especially evident in the practice of memorial rites, known as jesa. These ancestral rituals, performed at home or in family shrines, reinforce familial bonds and historical consciousness. Though their prevalence has declined among younger generations, jesa remains a significant cultural practice, particularly during national holidays such as Chuseok and Lunar New Year. These rites symbolize continuity, filial piety, and a collective memory that ties families to their broader national story. Monuments and architecture also play a symbolic role in reinforcing Korea's Confucian heritage. The Confucian academies, or seowon, that the landscape serve as historical reminders of the scholarly culture that flourished during the Joseon dynasty. These academies are often preserved as cultural heritage sites and are visited by students and tourists alike. Their spatial design symmetrical, harmonious, and hierarchical reflects Confucian principles and serves as a tangible embodiment of Korean identity. Public institutions, including schools and government buildings, often incorporate symbolic elements that echo Confucian ideals. The portraits of historical scholars, calligraphic displays of moral aphorisms, and ritualized ceremonies at educational milestones all contribute to a symbolic environment that affirms ethical and communal values. Such symbols are not merely decorative, but serve as constant reminders of the ideals to which society aspires. The Korean flag, the taegukgi, is rich with symbolic meaning. The central yin-yang symbol represents balance and harmony, while the surrounding trigrams from the I Ching denote fundamental principles such as heaven, earth, water, and fire. This cosmological framework reflects both indigenous and Confucian influences and serves as a visual expression of Korea's philosophical and national identity. Displayed during international events, political rallies, and cultural celebrations, the flag symbolizes unity amidst diversity and a deep historical consciousness. South Korea's approach to national identity also involves symbolic reckoning with its colonial past and division. Memorials to independence activists, museums commemorating the Japanese occupation, and sites honoring the Korean War are infused with symbolism that speaks to resilience, sacrifice, and the quest for sovereignty. These symbols are central to the national narrative and serve to unify citizens through shared memory and moral clarity. Both Japan and Korea use education as a primary vehicle for transmitting symbolic values. Textbooks, school rituals, and civic education programs incorporate historical symbols to cultivate national identity. In Japan, the moral education curriculum emphasizes virtues such as respect, perseverance, and harmony qualities associated with imperial and Confucian ideals. In Korea, character education rooted in Confucian ethics continues to be a part of the school system, even as it evolves to accommodate democratic values and global citizenship. Symbols also play a role in international relations, where they can either build bridges or reinforce divisions. In diplomatic ceremonies, the presence of imperial or Confucian symbols can carry nuanced messages about national intent, historical memory, and cultural pride. State visits, for instance, often involve rituals and exchanges that are steeped in symbolic gestures from bowing and gift-giving to shared meals and traditional attire. These actions convey respect, continuity, and mutual recognition. Conversely, symbolic disputes can exacerbate tensions, as seen in controversies over historical monuments, war apologies, and textbook content. In both Japan and Korea, debates over how history is symbolized in the public sphere often become proxy battles over national identity, moral legitimacy, and political positioning. Statues, museum exhibits, and official speeches carry weight not just for what they say, but for what they symbolize in broader historical narratives. The power of symbolism lies in its ability to convey complex ideas in a form that is emotionally resonant and culturally accessible. This is particularly important in multicultural and generationally diverse societies. Younger generations in Japan and Korea may not practice traditional rituals with the same frequency as their elders, but they still encounter symbols of imperial and Confucian heritage in media, education, and public life. These symbols, reinterpreted through the lens of contemporary values, continue to shape how individuals relate to their national identities. Art, media, and popular culture serve as dynamic arenas for symbolic expression and reinterpretation. In Japan, anime and manga often incorporate imperial or Shinto imagery to explore themes of destiny, moral conflict, and societal duty. In Korea, historical dramas and films bring Confucian rituals and royal court life to a mass audience, sparking renewed interest in cultural heritage. These media not only entertain but educate, offering symbolic narratives that resonate with modern audiences while connecting them to their roots. The digital age has amplified the reach and reinterpretation of national symbols. Online platforms, social media, and digital archives allow for the widespread dissemination and discussion of symbolic content. Virtual tours of imperial palaces, digital recreations of Confucian ceremonies, and viral videos of national events bring symbolic experiences to a global audience. This digital engagement democratizes access to cultural heritage and allows for new forms of symbolic participation. Symbols also serve as instruments of resilience during times of crisis. In Japan, after the 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami, the emperor's televised address offered comfort and unity through its symbolic significance. Similarly, in Korea, national symbols and Confucian ideals of communal responsibility were invoked during the COVID-19 pandemic to encourage solidarity and public cooperation. In both cases, symbolism provided a sense of stability and shared purpose amidst uncertainty. Looking ahead, the continued relevance of symbolic traditions in Japan and Korea depends on their adaptability and resonance with contemporary values. For symbols to unite rather than divide, they must be inclusive, reflective, and open to reinterpretation. In Japan, discussions about female succession to the throne, reinterpretations of imperial rituals, and more inclusive narratives of history are efforts to modernize imperial symbolism. In Korea, debates over gender roles and Confucian rites, reinterpretation of ancestral traditions, and integration of diverse cultural identities are reshaping the symbolic landscape. Educational institutions, artists, and community leaders play a crucial role in this process. Schools can foster critical engagement with symbolic heritage, encouraging students to explore its meanings and relevance. Artists and cultural practitioners can reimagine symbols in ways that speak to contemporary challenges and aspirations. Community rituals, public art projects, and inclusive commemorations can transform symbols into living practices that bind diverse citizens together. The symbolic legacies of the Chrysanthemum and Confucian heritage are not static relics, but dynamic components of national identity. They offer a language through which Japan and Korea can express unity, continuity, and shared purpose. When approached thoughtfully and inclusively, these symbols can help bridge the past and the present, affirm collective values, and inspire future generations. As Japan and Korea continue to evolve, their symbolic traditions will remain vital threads in the tapestry of national identity, weaving together history, culture, and the aspirations of a people seeking both remembrance and renewal. The modern era has presented both Japan and Korea with unprecedented challenges and opportunities concerning the roles of monarchy and traditional governance. For Japan, the monarchy has transitioned from a once absolute institution to a symbol of national identity within a constitutional framework. For Korea, the collapse of the monarchy during the early 20th century and the establishment of a modern republic have required the nation to reconcile with its royal past in new ways. This chapter explores how the legacies of monarchy in both countries have transformed under the pressures of modernity, globalization, and democratic development. In Japan, the end of World War II marked a profound turning point for the monarchy. The imperial institution, which had served as a central pillar of state authority and national mythology, was redefined under the post-war constitution promulgated in 1947. The emperor ceased to be a divine ruler and instead became the symbol of the state and of the unity of the people, a status enshrined in Article 1 of the Japanese Constitution. This symbolic role was unprecedented and reflected a delicate balance between tradition and democratic governance. Emperor Hirohito, known posthumously as Emperor Showa, remained on the throne but relinquished claims of divinity in a historic declaration issued on January 1, 1946. This Humanity Declaration was a critical step in reorienting the imperial institution from a theological and militaristic role to a more humanized and ceremonial one. The emperor's new responsibilities focused on public appearances, ceremonial functions, and moral leadership, which, though stripped of political power, retained deep cultural significance. Subsequent emperors have continued to shape the symbolic monarchy through their conduct and public service. Emperor Akihito, who reigned from 1989 to 2019, played a particularly important role in modernizing the image of the throne. Fluent in English and known for his compassion, Akihito and Empress Michiko made concerted efforts to reach out to the public, visiting disaster-stricken areas and engaging with marginalized communities. These gestures resonated deeply with the Japanese people, reinforcing the emperor's symbolic function as a unifier and moral guide. Akihito's decision to abdicate in 2019, the first abdication in over 2 centuries, was a transformative moment that demonstrated the adaptability of the monarchy to contemporary realities. His son, Emperor Naruhito, ascended the throne with a clear understanding of his role as a modern monarch. Educated in both Japan and abroad, Naruhito has emphasized themes of global cooperation, environmental stewardship, and historical reflection, positioning the monarchy within a broader, internationalist framework. Despite its ceremonial nature, the Japanese monarchy continues to hold a central place in national consciousness. Imperial events such as enthronements, royal weddings, and public addresses attract widespread media attention and public engagement. These occasions provide opportunities for collective participation in national rituals and underscore the continuing relevance of the monarchy as a cultural and historical touchstone. However, the modern monarchy also faces significant challenges. Debates over succession laws, particularly the male-only succession rule, have sparked discussions about gender equality and the future of the institution. The shrinking size of the imperial family, combined with broader demographic changes in Japanese society, raises questions about the sustainability of the monarchy in its current form. These debates reflect broader societal shifts and the ongoing negotiation between tradition and progress. In contrast to Japan, Korea's encounter with modernity involved the complete dissolution of its monarchy. The Korean Empire, established in 1897 in a last effort to assert independence from foreign encroachment, was short-lived. Japan's annexation of Korea in 1910 marked the end of over a millennium of royal rule, beginning with the Three Kingdoms and culminating in the Joseon dynasty. The fall of the monarchy was not merely a political event, but a symbolic rupture with Korea's historical identity and cultural continuity. During the colonial period, Japan actively suppressed Korean royal institutions, converting palaces into government offices and marginalizing members of the royal family. Cultural erasure extended to Confucian rituals, language policies, and educational systems. After liberation in 1945, Korea faced the monumental task of rebuilding national identity, now as a republic rather than a monarchy. The royal family no longer played a political role, and the newly formed governments of North and South Korea each forged distinct paths, none of which involved restoring the monarchy. In South Korea, the memory of the Joseon dynasty has nonetheless remained a potent cultural force. Royal palaces such as Gyeongbokgung and Cheongdeokgung have been restored and preserved as national heritage sites, visited by millions each year. These sites serve as living museums, offering insight into Korea's monarchical past and reinforcing a sense of historical continuity. While there is no official monarchy in Korea today, public fascination with royal history remains strong. This interest is reflected in the popularity of historical dramas, novels, and academic research that explore the lives of kings, queens, and court officials. These cultural productions serve not only to entertain, but also to reimagine and reinterpret Korea's royal legacy in ways that speak to contemporary concerns about identity, values, and national pride. Some descendants of the Joseon royal family have maintained public visibility through cultural and philanthropic activities. Figures such as Lee Suk, a recognized member of the former royal family, have advocated for greater recognition of Korea's royal heritage. Though there have been occasional discussions about symbolic restoration or formal acknowledgement, there is no widespread political support for reinstating a monarchy. Instead, royal symbols are often employed to enhance cultural tourism, education, and heritage preservation. South Korea's modern republic has positioned itself as a dynamic democracy with a forward-looking vision. Yet, the country's approach to its monarchical past reveals a nuanced strategy of cultural incorporation without political reinstatement. Royal traditions are respected and preserved, but they are situated within a national narrative that emphasizes democratic values, economic development, and global engagement. This balancing act allows South Korea to honor its past while firmly anchoring its identity in the present. North Korea, in a paradoxical twist, has constructed a dynastic system that resembles monarchical succession, though under the banner of a revolutionary socialist state. The Kim family has maintained political control through hereditary succession, creating a system that, while ideologically distinct from traditional monarchy, exhibits similar dynamics of legitimacy, symbolism, and ritual. This form of dynastic rule underscores the enduring appeal of centralized, symbolic leadership even in ostensibly modern states. In both Japan and Korea, the legacies of monarchy continue to inform public life, national identity, and cultural expression. The transformation of these legacies reflects broader societal changes, including democratization, globalization, and evolving conceptions of authority and legitimacy. Monarchy in the modern era is no longer about direct governance, but about the symbolic articulation of values, history, and collective memory. Japan's imperial institution has shown a remarkable capacity for adaptation, balancing the preservation of tradition with responsiveness to modern expectations. From divine emperor to constitutional symbol, the monarchy has navigated the transition with continuity and grace. The current challenges it faces, particularly regarding succession and public relevance, will require further innovation and societal dialogue. Korea's experience, though marked by rupture, illustrates a different kind of transformation. The absence of a reigning monarchy has not diminished the cultural significance of royal traditions. Instead, these traditions have been recontextualized within a democratic framework, allowing for a pluralistic engagement with the past. This approach reflects Korea's resilience and its ability to derive strength from historical complexity rather than uniformity. The enduring legacy of monarchy in both nations is thus found not in political power, but in cultural resonance. Palaces, rituals, ceremonies, and stories continue to captivate and inspire, offering windows into the past and mirrors for the present. As Japan and Korea navigate the 21st century, their monarchical traditions will remain vital sources of reflection, identity, and national storytelling. Future prospects for monarchy in Japan will likely hinge on legal reforms, public sentiment, and cultural relevance. Issues such as the role of women in the imperial family, the visibility of younger royals, and the integration of diverse perspectives will shape the institution's evolution. In Korea, the royal legacy will continue to thrive in cultural domains, influencing art, education, and public discourse. The transformation of monarchy in the modern era is a testament to the dynamic interplay between tradition and change. It reveals how ancient institutions can find new meaning in contemporary contexts, and how societies can honor their histories while embracing democratic values and future aspirations. Japan and Korea, each in their own way, demonstrate that the monarchy, far from being a relic, remains a living symbol of national identity, cultural depth, and historical consciousness. As Japan and Korea look toward the future, their shared yet distinct histories of monarchy and dynastic governance remain central to national self-understanding and cultural heritage. The evolution of these institutions reflects the broader changes both nations have undergone over the past centuries. From divine kingship and Confucian rule to constitutional monarchy and modern republicanism, the persistence of dynastic ideals and monarchical symbolism continues to shape identity, memory, and vision for the future. In Japan, the Chrysanthemum throne has survived war, occupation, and constitutional overhaul. It stands today not as a seat of power, but as a symbol of continuity and national unity. The Japanese imperial family represents a unique case of a monarchy that has adapted successfully to modernity by embracing a ceremonial and symbolic role. This transformation did not come without tensions. The post-war era demanded a redefinition of authority, and the emperor's renunciation of divinity was not just a legal shift, but a profound psychological and cultural reorientation for the Japanese people. Yet, the monarchy remains deeply ingrained in the national psyche. The Heisei and Reiwa eras, marking the reigns of Emperor Akihito and Emperor Naruhito respectively, illustrate the capacity of the institution to be relevant in a contemporary world. These eras are not just chronological markers. They are cultural epochs that encapsulate collective experiences, ideals, and aspirations. They serve as frameworks within which Japanese society reflects on its progress and challenges. The symbolic functions of the Japanese emperor include participation in disaster memorials, ceremonial planting of rice, and hosting foreign dignitaries. These actions reinforce a non-political but morally resonant role that complements Japan's democratic governance. The emperor has become a cultural mediator, representing the nation's past while guiding its ceremonial present. In this capacity, the monarchy has shown that institutions rooted in antiquity can still offer meaning in an age of global citizenship and technological advancement. Nevertheless, the future of the Japanese monarchy is far from assured. Succession remains one of the most pressing issues. With a dwindling number of male heirs, public debate has intensified over the possibility of allowing women to ascend the throne. The public appears increasingly supportive of this change, but political inertia and traditionalist resistance remain obstacles. The resolution of this issue will likely shape the monarchy's relevance for decades to come. Equally important is how the younger generation of Japanese citizens perceives the imperial institution. While respect remains high, engagement is more limited. The challenge for the imperial family is to maintain symbolic relevance in a society that is becoming more diverse, egalitarian, and outward-looking. Whether through digital engagement, educational outreach, or enhanced visibility of royal activities, the future of the monarchy may depend on its ability to connect authentically with modern values. In Korea, the royal past exists as memory, cultural inheritance, and symbolic identity rather than a living institution. The abolition of the monarchy in the early 20th century created a rupture, but not an erasure, of dynastic ideals. The legacy of the Goryeo and Joseon dynasties remains deeply embedded in South Korea's cultural and moral fabric. Confucian ideals of governance, family duty, and ethical leadership continue to influence political discourse and social behavior. Cultural sites such as royal palaces, Confucian shrines, and ancestral memorial halls are more than tourist attractions. They are living spaces of national reflection and pride. Rituals like the Jongmyo Dage have been restored with meticulous care, emphasizing the importance of continuity with the past. These ceremonies, while not political, carry civic and educational significance. They transmit values of respect, humility, and collective memory across generations. The popular fascination with royal history is another indicator of the monarchy's residual power in Korea. Television dramas, films, and novels often revisit the royal court as a stage for moral dilemmas, political intrigue, and human emotion. These narratives serve to humanize historical figures and encourage critical engagement with the past. Through entertainment, a new form of dynastic storytelling has emerged, one that blends nostalgia with contemporary relevance. The question remains, can dynastic ideals continue to inform Korean society in meaningful ways? The answer lies in how these ideals are integrated into modern democratic and ethical frameworks. Confucian notions of moral leadership, for example, can contribute to debates on political responsibility and civic duty. Similarly, historical awareness of dynastic governance can enhance understanding of Korea's developmental trajectory and institutional resilience. Some voices have called for a more formal recognition of the former royal family, not as a political institution, but as cultural ambassadors or heritage stewards. While this idea has not gained mainstream traction, it reflects a desire among certain segments of the population to anchor modern identity in historical continuity. In a rapidly changing society, the stability and grandeur of royal traditions offer a sense of rootedness. The broader challenge for both Japan and Korea is how to make their monarchical and dynastic legacies inclusive and forward-looking. These traditions were historically patriarchal, hierarchical, and exclusionary. In today's more egalitarian societies, symbolic institutions must reflect diverse voices and experiences. This requires reinterpretation, reform, and sometimes uncomfortable conversations about the past. In Japan, steps toward gender-inclusive succession would not only modernize the institution, but also align it with broader social values. Greater representation of the imperial family in global humanitarian and environmental causes could also enhance its contemporary relevance. Such moves would reinforce the idea that the monarchy is not only a relic of the past, but a participant in shaping the future. In Korea, increased public education on royal history and Confucian heritage can foster a more nuanced understanding of national identity. This should include critical perspectives that examine the limitations of dynastic rule, the lives of marginalized groups, and the cultural pluralism that existed even within supposedly uniform traditions. Through education, Korea can cultivate a national consciousness that is both proud of its heritage and honest about its complexities. Globally, monarchies and dynastic traditions face similar crossroads. The 21st century has seen renewed interest in heritage and identity, but also demands for accountability, transparency, and inclusivity. Japan's monarchy is often compared to other constitutional monarchies, such as those in Europe. Like its counterparts, it must navigate the balance between ceremonial tradition and modern expectations. In Korea, although the monarchy is not present, the memory of dynastic governance continues to inform the national ethos, placing it within a global pattern of cultural remembrance. The future of monarchies and dynastic ideals in Japan and Korea will depend not on a return to past forms, but on their creative adaptation. These traditions can serve as resources for moral imagination, civic education, and cultural diplomacy. They can remind citizens of the values of service, continuity, and collective identity, especially in times of fragmentation and uncertainty. Technology offers new possibilities for engaging with these legacies. Virtual reality tours of palaces, interactive exhibits on Confucian governance, and online platforms for royal archives can make historical knowledge accessible to broader audiences. Digital storytelling can bring the richness of dynastic history to life in ways that are participatory and inclusive. Art, literature, and public discourse also have a role to play. New interpretations of historical figures, innovative uses of symbolic imagery, and cross-cultural dialogues can revitalize traditional narratives. By inviting reinterpretation, monarchies and dynastic ideals can become spaces of cultural negotiation rather than fixed monuments. There is also an international dimension. Cultural diplomacy efforts that draw upon monarchical and dynastic heritage can strengthen Japan and Korea's soft power. Royal ceremonies, Confucian festivals, and exhibitions of dynastic art can serve as platforms for intercultural exchange. These initiatives demonstrate how history can be a bridge rather than a barrier between nations. At a time when many societies are grappling with questions of identity and belonging, the thoughtful engagement with monarchical and dynastic legacies offers valuable insights. These institutions remind us that identity is not solely defined by present conditions, but also shaped by the stories we tell about our past. They encourage reflection on what it means to serve, to lead, and to belong to a larger narrative. The future of monarchies and dynastic ideals in Japan and Korea is not predetermined. It will be shaped by choices made by leaders, educators, artists, and citizens. Whether as constitutional symbols or cultural memories, these traditions hold the potential to enrich national life and global understanding. They offer continuity in a world of change, and meaning in an age often characterized by speed and fragmentation. As Japan and Korea continue their respective journeys, their engagement with monarchical heritage will remain a vital part of the dialogue between history and hope, between tradition and transformation. The historical and cultural trajectories of Japan and Korea offer a profound study in the resilience, adaptability, and symbolic potency of monarchies and dynastic systems. These institutions, once absolute in authority and foundational to national identities, have evolved in markedly different, yet equally illuminating ways. In their respective contexts, the legacy of monarchy continues to influence cultural consciousness, collective memory, and national narratives. This conclusion explores the overarching themes that have emerged from their histories and considers how they speak to broader patterns of continuity and transformation in East Asian civilization. Japan's imperial tradition is perhaps the most enduring monarchy in the world, tracing its lineage back over 2 millennia. It has evolved from a Shinto-inspired divine kingship to a constitutional symbol of unity in the modern era. The transformation of the Chrysanthemum throne encapsulates Japan's ability to adapt its institutions while retaining cultural continuity. Unlike many monarchies that have faded into obscurity or ceremonial irrelevance, Japan's monarchy remains a vital symbol of the nation's historical depth and cultural coherence. This endurance owes much to the deliberate efforts of Japanese leadership to recalibrate the role of the emperor in line with the changing political and social landscape. From the Meiji Restoration, which centralized imperial authority, to the post-war constitution, which redefined the emperor as a symbolic figure, each phase of Japan's modern history has reshaped the institution without severing it from its past. This capacity for institutional reinvention, grounded in historical legitimacy, has made the Japanese monarchy not only a relic of antiquity, but also a contemporary national asset. The emperor's role today is ceremonial and spiritual rather than political, yet it resonates deeply with the Japanese people. Public rituals, seasonal greetings, and empathetic responses to national crises have positioned the emperor as a moral guide and cultural touchstone. While challenges such as succession laws and generational engagement remain, the monarchy continues to offer a sense of national unity in a society marked by demographic decline and shifting global roles. Korea, by contrast, experienced the dissolution of its monarchy in the early 20th century with the Japanese annexation, and it has not returned to a royal system since. However, the absence of a reigning monarchy has not equated to a disappearance of monarchical influence. The dynastic histories of Goryeo and Joseon remain deeply embedded in Korean identity, values, and cultural practices. Korea's Confucian heritage, inherited from its dynastic past, continues to shape family structures, ethical norms, and societal expectations. The loss of the Korean monarchy was traumatic and politically transformative. The end of dynastic rule coincided with the imposition of colonial governance, which sought to erase traditional institutions and rewrite national history. In the decades that followed, South Korea emerged as a vibrant republic, but one that looked to its royal past not with nostalgia alone, but with a critical eye and a restorative impulse. Palaces have been restored, rituals revived, and royal narratives reintroduced into public discourse. These efforts reflect not a desire to reinstate monarchy, but to reclaim a part of the national soul. What has emerged in Korea is a hybrid model of cultural monarchy, a monarchy without a crown, but with a living legacy. Historical dramas, Confucian ceremonies, and royal heritage tourism illustrate how deeply the idea of the dynasty still captivates and informs Korean life. Even in its absence, the monarchy serves as a mirror for contemporary values, aspirations, and critiques. It provides a means for Koreans to explore issues of leadership, virtue, and continuity through the lens of history. When viewed together, the experiences of Japan and Korea present a dual narrative of adaptation and reimagination. Japan's monarchy has survived by redefining its purpose and shedding its absolutist trappings. Korea's monarchy, though politically extinct, continues to exert influence through cultural memory and ethical traditions. Both models highlight the enduring power of symbolic authority and the role of historical narratives in shaping modern identities. These narratives are not static. In both countries, the interpretation of monarchical history is constantly evolving. In Japan, new generations question traditional gender roles within the imperial household and advocate for reforms that reflect contemporary social values. In Korea, scholars and artists revisit royal history to uncover voices previously marginalized or forgotten, expanding the scope of collective memory. Importantly, both nations demonstrate that monarchies and dynastic ideals need not be antithetical to democratic values. In Japan, the constitutional monarchy coexists with a robust parliamentary democracy. The emperor, while devoid of political power, remains a revered figure whose presence transcends partisanship. In Korea, democratic governance is enriched by a nuanced understanding of historical leadership models and ethical governance principles rooted in Confucian thought. These examples challenge the notion that modernity requires a complete break from the past. The regional context also provides important insights. East Asia has long been a crucible of dynastic politics, with China, Korea, and Japan developing sophisticated models of imperial rule. The tributary system, Confucian statecraft, and Buddhist cosmologies formed the bedrock of governance and diplomacy for centuries. Even as these systems declined or transformed, their echoes persist in contemporary political cultures. The values of harmony, filial piety, meritocratic leadership, and moral authority continue to influence social behavior and political rhetoric. In this broader East Asian frame, the experiences of Japan and Korea show how dynastic legacies can serve as sources of both inspiration and caution. They remind modern societies of the strengths and limitations of hierarchical systems, the importance of legitimacy, and the power of cultural continuity. They also highlight the need for adaptation, how traditions must evolve to remain meaningful. Looking ahead, the future of monarchical traditions in Japan and Korea will depend on how these societies engage with their past. Will Japan reform its succession laws to allow for female emperors, and thus ensure the continuity of the throne in a gender-inclusive way? Will Korea deepen its engagement with royal heritage to foster cultural education and civic pride without veering into romanticism or historical distortion? These questions are not merely institutional or academic. They touch on the very nature of national identity, historical justice, and generational dialogue. Technological advancements also offer new avenues for engaging with monarchical history. Virtual archives, digital storytelling, and interactive platforms can democratize access to royal narratives and allow for more inclusive historical interpretations. These tools can bridge generational gaps and make the lessons of the past relevant to contemporary audiences. They also enable global engagement, allowing Japan and Korea to share their rich heritages with the world in dynamic, accessible formats. Another area of potential is cultural diplomacy. Monarchical symbols and ceremonies can serve as powerful tools of soft power. Imperial and royal rituals, exhibitions of historical artifacts, and collaborative research projects can strengthen international relationships and promote cross-cultural understanding. These initiatives demonstrate that monarchies, even when symbolic, have a role to play in global cultural dialogues. Moreover, the moral and ethical dimensions of dynastic traditions offer valuable insights in today's often polarized political environments. The Confucian emphasis on virtue, responsibility, and the moral conduct of rulers provides a counterpoint to the transactional and populist tendencies of modern politics. While these ideals must be adapted to contemporary democratic norms, they offer a vocabulary for discussing leadership and public service grounded in ethical reflection. Monarchies and dynastic ideals are not simply residues of a past era. They are evolving institutions and ideas that continue to inform, inspire, and challenge modern societies. In Japan and Korea, these legacies serve as bridges between past and future, between memory and aspiration. They offer narratives of resilience, cultural depth, and ethical engagement that remain relevant in the 21st century. The continuity and change observed in Japan and Korea's monarchical traditions underscore a universal theme: the human need for meaning, belonging, and identity. Monarchies, whether active or remembered, provide frameworks through which societies narrate their origins, articulate their values, and envision their destinies. In honoring these traditions with honesty and creativity, Japan and Korea demonstrate that the past is not a constraint, but a resource, a foundation upon which to build inclusive, reflective, and forward-looking national communities. As we move deeper into a global era defined by rapid transformation and cultural fluidity, the lessons from East Asia's monarchies remind us of the enduring relevance of historical consciousness. By engaging with their dynastic legacies with critical insight and cultural pride, Japan and Korea offer compelling models for how nations can navigate the complexities of identity, governance, and tradition in the modern world.